Hello, everybody. We're here in Berlin at our apartment. I'm here with Beata and Libor.
Big greetings.
Qualia, very core Qualia people out here. Hardcore Qualia people. Although Libor might define himself as hardcore prediction error minimizer. And flourishing maximizer.
But also valence maximizer. Individually and collectively.
Yes. Excellent.
All of those objective functions are individually and collectively.
Excellent. Excellent. And yeah, so we're gonna have a free-flowing conversation. This probably won't be posted online unless it turns out really good. But answering some of Betta's questions about the technicalities of neural annealing, especially when it comes to energy management. And yeah, just kind of a hangout as well, just to see what happens.
Nice. So here we have basically 13 chapters that require some collective brainstorming. A few of them are probably rather easy and intuitive because we already talked about them a lot in the other parts of the manual, and those are energy raising, energy dampening, and energy shifting.
Yeah.
However, I find some of them quite more tricky, such as like dealing with limit cycles.
Yes.
Identifying and addressing negative attractors.
Yes.
Like my direction here would be like physiological, but I think it probably has a way more mathematical approach. Then harnessing the neg entropy of peak states.
Yes.
Spectral considerations, frequency transforms.
Yeah.
Basically, like some of those chapters towards the end, I would like to talk a bit about those.
Yeah, that sounds great. One technical thing is like, are you also recording audio?
I am not, but I will do that. Thank you for reminding me.
Cool.
Wow. All right. Ready. Should we maybe start from the beginning?
Yeah.
All right. So these are some chapters that Libor and I were creating together last summer, and with energy raising, we mentioned that energy sources can be sensory input, surprise, attention, and valence.
Yeah.
Or maybe we could add some substances.
Substances wouldn't that also be?
I would say that's upstream. That like substances then modulate other things.
I see. Yeah. Implicit surprise maybe. Sometimes.
Well. I mean, something like DMT, kind of functioning as like these like powerful like metronome in the visual field, and then in a lot of things like being just downstream of that. But yeah, maybe I'm thinking like substances. I think maybe the least was like for like natural external ways of raising energy. But I suppose that like biochemical modulation maybe would be like a category, broadly speaking, yeah. And I guess I would actually include something like breath work within biochemical modulation, because it's more than just like if you do a Wim Hof breathing exercise for 10 minutes, you're really doing more than just like activating your muscles, right? Like you're
so
actually
that's connected to vagus nerve, no?
Yeah, but also you're doing you're changing kind of like the gases in your in your blood. And is it like a biochemical change as well?
Yeah.
Although I think like most of the psychoactivity comes from like vasoconstriction, paradoxical vasoconstriction. Like it is paradoxical, but like that if you hyperventilate, actually like less oxygen gets to your brain because of like vasoconstriction, which is like counterintuitive. But and then like a lot of the high that you experience is like actually kind of oxygen deprivation.
Right. So to maximize energy source efficiency, we mentioned paying total attention to it. Repetitive, symmetrical, oscillatory sensory data. I think, Libor, these are still your notes.
Yeah, I read, I think.
Make it align with your aesthetic goals. I find it like slightly vague, but I wonder if like how how much detail we basically also want here. Maybe those chapters can be like bullet points with some basic concepts. So would we want to add something more, like maximizing energy source efficiency? This is, just like lots of notes in in one cluster. But yeah, let's move on with the dampening. So instead of me just like reading all of this, Andrés, would you maybe
just talk about energy
say
dampening?
what would be like the bullet points then that you would put in here?
Yes.
And then I can relocate something that we wrote and add it to the bullet points.
Yeah. So I guess like the trivial. So first of all, the trivial case is remove or reduce the intensity of sensory input. That's like the most straightforward. It's like you're at a concert and you're like overwhelmed with energy, and it's dissonant energy that just go to the bathroom or go take a break, right? A little bit more interesting is like modulate attention in ways that are like more calming. It's another broad kind of like way of doing energy dampening. There is like an interesting, also kind of slightly paradoxical thing here, because in our model, attention, roughly speaking, is always energizing, like and increases maybe the coupling constant between the things you're paying attention to. But so then you might ask the question like, okay, so how can you use attention in order to reduce your energy? What I have found, at least based on a lot of meditation on this topic, and like noticing like, okay, what am I doing with attention when I am actually relaxing with it? The answer is that you're focusing on patterns that are soothing, and essentially by paying attention to them, you're doing two things. Like one, you're stopping paying attention to patterns that are agitating. So okay, like that is one reason. But then the other thing is that then you're energizing patterns that are soothing, and for the most part, they're going to be like low frequency and consonant. So a lot of like meditation techniques to increase tranquility are things like imagine a very large kind of like wave in the ocean, and it's very calm and like very slow. And so what you're doing is kind of you're creating these representations with these metronomes, and themselves then they work to calm and soothe. Furthermore, of course, like equanimity is a type of energy dampening. More like energy and stress dissipation. Techniques like things in Dzogchen practice, like recognizing awake awareness, or like distributing your attention to kind of like infinite space, as opposed to like any particular object. That is something that I've been doing quite a bit recently, and quite effective. At least like there's kind of maybe a threshold of meditation skill or progress where like when you tune into, essentially, I mean, like the way I would describe it phenomenologically is something like, imagine there's like a infinite canvas of like an infinite sheet or something like this. I don't know how to really pronounce it. Sheet or something? Yeah, like a bed sheet, right? And it is kind of like it starts out kind of like twisted in one part. So then like what you're doing is kind of like, as you visualize kind of like dissipation of the stress, you're kind of like letting the fold and the tension just kind of like spread in these like infinite canvas. And the thing is because it's infinite, it just can take any amount of stress without problem. I would imagine that that you kind of actually what you're doing is probably radiating it out. Is like what I'm gonna guess. I mean, I don't know, but and that technique is super powerful, and it can be used in any context. So, for example, you're having a very difficult psychedelic experience. Maybe the way Shamil might put it, Shamil Chandaria might even put it, is something like yes, like awake awareness can take anything. Like it doesn't matter how bad it is.
Michael Teft also says that a lot.
Yes, actually, Michael Teft is one of Shamil's teachers. So
Okay, yes.
Yeah, and so the awake awareness can take anything. Like it doesn't matter how gnarly it is. And actually, I think one way of visualizing this is like the normal human mode of experience is one where like when you're like overstressed in one region, you try to pass it on to other regions, but they're still within you, and it never occurs to you that you could actually kind of like relax and dissipate it into kind of an infinite space, right? It's a very different move. It's very counterintuitive. But then when you're doing that, then it actually feels like, you're kind of radiating it out. So like that is one, I think like fairly effective and improves with practice way of dampening energy.
So basically, besides removing yourself from the situation where sensory input is intense, one would still require certain kind of meditation skills to do the dampening in a skillful way.
Yeah, I guess that would be maybe probably the advanced version. But it is maybe the most powerful.
Yeah, but at least like modulating attention. I feel like that for many people who don't are in general really not familiar with meditation at all, like this aspect of refocusing your attention somewhere is like a bit abstract. Like maybe conceptually they see what we might mean with it, but to practice it is kind of like a whole different thing.
Yeah, that's true.
I feel like what Michael Taft says a lot is noticing spaciousness around all sensations, which seems to expand this ability to.
Yeah, exactly. So like rather than focusing on the pattern, you focus like in the space on which it is embedded.
And then after a while, you can do that bigger and bigger spaciousness, and eventually you can just jump into infinite awareness by default.
Yeah.
And maybe in the predictive processing framework, you could also say that one way would be to focus more on the higher order priors, on the more global priors instead of the more local ones, which encompass more of, which under them have much more the local ones, but when one focuses on the higher order ones, that tends to more dissolve or delocalize the internal structure.
Yeah.
And
sorry, go ahead.
do we want to add equanimity somewhere here?
Yeah.
Does that have to do?
This will be a type of equanimity practice, I would actually say. It's kind of equanimity via the path of the spaciousness. We could put it that way. Because you're using the space as like the heat sink, essentially, like the stress dissipator.
Yeah.
Other more. And it's also kind of like a do nothing practice. That's the other thing that like if you're focusing on this kind of like spacious awareness to dissipate stress, then it's like, it's not working. That itself is actually a sensation that you could also try to dissipate. So it's very recursive. Like there's a lot of things that you may think like, like actually like your frustration about like not being able to focus on space, for example, is also something that itself can dissipate.
Yeah, okay. That's very meta.
Yeah, like that's roughly speaking, yeah, the higher order equanimity, where like you're equanimous about your lack of first order equanimity, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I think that once people learn the manual, they will be champions in dissipating stress. That's our goal.
Or also, one method that seems to be effective is to just tune into just there is qualia, and that's like maybe the most general. Well, there could be more general stuff. I would argue like neither qualia nor non-qualia, but if one is just there's qualia, that's like one of the extremely general higher order powers, which seems to like dissolve or the local stress in a sense.
Yeah, the skillful construction of higher order priors.
Yes.
How Shamil might put it.
That's a good. You can maybe write that down as like skillful construction of higher order powers. I like that.
Yeah. Then I suppose the more trivial things, right? It's like modulate or like for example, if you have access to music, obviously like very relaxing music, like essentially like soothing patterns is a energy dampening. Like more hardcore, not hardcore, but like more kind of a sledgehammer is a kind of like noise inducers in general. I mean, like I think like SSRIs, for example. I mean, like again, like that's only if you really need it. But SSRIs in the annealing paradigm, they work as like noise inducers, and so like they are like actually preventing annealing from happening. And again, if you are psychotic, you can argue that like, you're having like bad annealing, like dissonant annealing happening. And like SSRI is essentially the main effect is like they blunt affect, and they're phenomenologically kind of similar to like listening to a lot of white noise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or some noisy music.
Hmm?
Or some noisy music.
No, well, yeah, but it has to be kind of like a very soft envelope in the frequency domain, because noisy things can also be kind of like sharp, like for example, like cymbals and things like that, and those are actually still quite energizing. And so essentially, the first approximation, let me kind of say like, so this is like the spectrum, like so this is let's say like 40 hertz or something like that. And then like this. Okay, so like this is a pure tone, or very close to a pure tone, like a pure 40 hertz. These would actually be felt as like somewhat dissonant, actually. Like if you start to kind of like widen the spectrum, because this is kind of like a combination of several frequencies that are very close together. But then if you keep widening it, and then like, oh, this is like a wave, but on the frequency domain, then actually this turns into noise.
Yeah.
So like as a function of how sharp and concentrated the energy is in the spectrum, it goes from like a pure tone, like harmony potential, to like kind of dissonant, to just noise. So it's like positive valence to negative to neutral.
Maybe dongs are like, no, how are they called? The one that was played yesterday on the meditation, that instrument. I'm not sure how it's called.
Oh yeah, gong.
Yeah, gong.
Yeah, that could definitely be in that space. Yeah, very wide. Yeah, big envelope noise.
Yeah, I have one playlist that has mostly these kinds of tunes, very long and same, and sometimes it's really amazing for meditation.
Yeah.
I saw a reel a few days ago where some older musician guy put like a metal ball on his head.
Yeah.
And would like hit it in a similar kind of way.
Yeah.
And he wrote something like that this is his kind of like a stress managing technique. Like first when I saw it, I was a bit unsure. Like, you know, if it's really on your head, could it also maybe be damaging in a certain way? But I don't know. Like basically, it's like having a gong, just like on your head. Do you think this is?
Yeah,
like
there is a subtlety to add, which is that you could use actually like noise as a source of energy, and unfortunately, yeah, this is a case where like it has to do with the attention, because if you focus on the noise, and in fact you could like focus on noise and focus on something else at once. Yeah, I mean it will degrade the signal, but also it will energize and like it might cause entropic disintegration. But it's more like if you're listening to noise, but then relaxing as well, like focusing on relaxation, then that can really work as energy dampening. But in fact, like noise itself can also be like a energy raising activity. So there's probably some important subtlety here, like how to help people manage their attention while listening to noise might be important. Maybe it's kind of, or like the ocean, for example, is perfect. It's perfect because the sound of the ocean is like kind of close to white noise. So I think it's brown noise or something. But then visually, it's like this very relaxing, like low frequency, fairly consonant stimuli. So that's perfect. It's like, oh, you're focusing on that while the noise is kind of deconstructing your stress. So the ocean is maybe a good template for like good energy dampening.
And becoming an ocean is also great. Haribor du Praia.
That's right, yes. For ocean of consciousness.
For
it's
stress dissipation.
Yeah, it's a very good
My
one.
Kotav does that also sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of this man with the bowl, what about just pure vibrations without including the attention aspect to it? Like, do you think that exposing, like not necessarily your head, but your body to certain kind of vibration could also be relaxing in the case when someone is having a difficult experience, for example? I don't know. I don't have any experience, but I wonder how much truth is in there. Probably related to somatic therapy.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing on our list is energy shifting.
Yes.
Something that we have written here, that when it comes to shifting energy from one task to another, one can in the global context see reason for doing this to generate motivation. Did you write this, Libor?
Yes.
And something that I included was thermal analogy, phase transitions and critical points. This is something from actually thermodynamics or internal energy dynamics. Heat transfer and flow. Do you find anything here interesting, or would you start from a completely different?
No. I mean, yeah, the energy shifting. I mean, like, let me say, like, it is probably what I had in mind when I put that bullet point in the presentation. It was how to change where the energy is located within your experience, more than like, I guess, like shifting your energy in terms of like what tasks to do. So I can give you an example. I mean, like the super clear example of DMT energy shifting is when you have like a very intense visual field, and then something happens where like, oh, the visual field is not intense anymore, but then like your tactile field is very intense. And that, as far as I can tell, does follow principles of like coupled oscillators a lot. You can notice like how when energy transfers from the visual field to the tactile domain, there is a syncing up process where they need to essentially like synchronize for the energy to be able to seamlessly go through. There might also be like a cross-frequency transform in that like maybe the visual field is actually vibrating, let's say like at 30 hertz, and the tactile field actually would vibrate, let's say like at 90 hertz or like 120, like some integer multiple of it. And that's fine. I mean, like cross-frequency energy transfer is very doable. And so like, yeah, harmonization and energy shifting are actually quite connected. And if you want to minimize the energy transfer between two systems, this is where it sounds like a crackpot thing, but this is like totally 100% like well studied. You're gonna laugh about this. Like the way to do it is to actually have the two frequencies be in the golden ratio of each other.
To do what?
To minimize energy transfer. So if you have like a 10 hertz vibration, like a 10 hertz metronome, with its natural frequency is 10 hertz, right? Okay, so here's the basic setup. Like let's say you have two metronomes on the same table, right? And they're both tuned to a specific natural frequency. So let's say if this one prefers 9 hertz, this one prefers 11 hertz, they might couple and they will like average out to like 10 hertz, right? So like that is very common. Like if you're very close in frequency, you may couple together and you get like an average of the frequency, more or less. A subtlety is like, it depends on like how much energy each of them have, because if this is a very, very, very strong metronome and is like at 11 hertz, it's a very weak metronome at 9 hertz. When they finally couple, they will be much closer to 11 hertz, right? Like, so there's a little bit of a weight effect. This also happens in harmonic structure. So you have like a 10 hertz metronome and a 21 hertz metronome. Because they're like very close to being integer multiples of each other, they may couple together and then just be like 10 and 20 or something like that. Does this make sense?
Like to stay 10 and 20.
Yes, and be in phase as well.
I see,
So, I mean, the way that looks like, right, is like you have like kind of like two sinusoidal, but one is like twice as large as the other.
Yeah.
But like the point is that they coincide, or like they coincide when they arise. And this moment, like here and here, you have like both waves added together. So like this is a place where like you get like a strong like emergent additional energy. So like that's why actually when you have like a lot of like harmonics in phase, the attack can be sharper. And it's like one way in which you can get like these like very sharp waves is by just having a lot of frequencies that are integer multiples of each other in phase. But they have to be in phase. I mean, like that is the key thing, because if they're out of phase, actually the wave can look pretty scrambled. And like there's all kinds of waves you can make by just modulating the phase, but the strong interaction is when they're like actually aligned. Okay, so that is like another case. Now, if you have like 10 hertz and 16.819 or whatever it is, but essentially this is like the golden ratio. Do you remember? Like phi, right? Like phi is like 1.618, etc.
Yeah.
Or 1 plus the square root of 5 over 2 is the precise number. If you have that, then actually they will both do their own frequency. And it's almost as if they can't see each other.
Interesting.
Yeah. And this is like for mathematical reasons, and like it's, I don't know the derivation, but like I know this is like a rigorous like, mathematical inference.
But must it be like perfect golden ratio? That's physically non-realizable.
No, it's as long as you're close.
Okay.
I mean, it's kind of like if you graph kind of like how much coupling you get as a function of their natural frequencies, it has kind of this like it has like this local minima in the golden ratio. And it's not perfect, but it's
That's
if you
very
wanna,
interesting.
Yeah, so you know, I guess for sure is that like the systems that in their whole information processing pipeline, that the system doesn't want them to be coupled to each other, they will be probably around the golden ratio. And like that's probably a key design of like the whole nervous system. again, it's so funny because like I don't believe the golden ratio is like the theory of everything, right?
Yeah.
But there's some people who do.
Yeah.
And like this would just like feed them like validation. Like I knew it. Yeah.
To me now it just
Interesting.
seems mainly super interesting in the context of like perception.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if if there would be systems with different kinds of natural frequencies in an environment, then those who would be vibrating like in a phi with like golden ratio.
Yeah.
That you, as you said, like they wouldn't like respond to each other. They wouldn't see each other.
That's right.
So that like, yeah. Why I like it is because of mimicry. Also, I found it super interesting that when Philip K. Dick had his big like opening experience, he was inclined to write about certain kind of intelligence that like exist in the environment, but that like you cannot perceive it. And that like that's a kind of a mimicry. Like for him, this was the like his divine revelation, as he called it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't know. This has nothing to do with giving people advice for annealing. Obviously, I mean, but it just like an interesting analogy that crossed my mind. How you can think about perception and what kind of other systems in your environment might have a more direct like vibrational impact on you or none at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, exactly. There would be this idea like the people or systems that are kind of in those ratios, they literally don't see each other.
Wow.
They're like in different dimensions, and probably that does happen like when you really don't connect with somebody. Like it's not that you anti-connect, right? Like anti-connect might be kind of like when you're actually dissonant with the other, but like when it's like I just do not connect with somebody, like it might be we're in
Not in consonant or dissonant way.
Yeah, we're just in the golden ratio of each
Wow.
other.
Yeah.
But it's true,
cool.
golden ratio is everywhere in nature.
That
But
is
some
true.
people take it too far.
Yeah.
Like regarding some practical advices here, so we might use the idea of like refocusing our attention to a different sensory modality.
Attention to different sensory modality. Yeah.
Like
Essentially paying attention to two at once. Like if you want to do energy shift between, well, there's several things you can do. Let's say you want to do energy shift from like the visual domain to the tactile domain. Many techniques in here, and it's kind of like the rubber Beata thing, where like, well, you've got to explore and see what works for you. But let me give you like several techniques that have worked for me for this sort of thing. So I mean, the simplest is just to pay attention to both at once and try to get them to sync up. Now that might kind of like peak at like both of them actually sharing the same amount of energy, or like they're spread out, but you're not fully shifting from one side to the other. Now that's if they synchronize. I mean, that's one type of energy shifting, but it's more kind of, or maybe it's kind of like energy regularizing. You're making them the same amount of energy, or like part of the same coupled system. But then there's a lot of things that you can play with imagination and attention that may actually kind of like take energy from one to the other, where you imagine, for example, that the visual field is like source, or like the kind of like the energy source, and you imagine and construct or reify your body sensations as a receiver, and having that dynamic, there's kind of like only a one directional movement. I mean, I guess like to clarify this has a lot to do with like varieties of attention, that like there's just so many different things that you can do with attention that most people don't know. Like for example, like even focusing on breath, something that you can do is like, well, you can focus on the sensations as a self that is kind of like in somewhere and is like paying attention to it. That's a type of attention. It's kind of this directed attention. But then also you can pay attention to it, imagining that you are the sensation of breath. That you're kind of like locating the self in there. Alternatively, you can essentially pay attention to it as if it doesn't belong to anybody, right? It's like a more deconstructed type of attention. And then also you can probe attention or like a sensation and imagine that like, oh, you're kind of like directing to it, or that the energy is going from it to you. So you can play with the directionality. This is definitely a thing to practice and explore. And I think it probably has something to do with like the phase organization, that like kind of like which one is aligned and relative to each other. Is like if the phase maybe of the body is a little bit behind the phase of the vibrations in the visual field, then like the energy will go more from here to here than from here to here. And I think like, yeah, there's like subtle kind of like phase and attentional shifts where like it becomes more than just they both regularize, they both synchronize. And actually it's like, no, one is like lending energy to the other and boosting the other.
I see.
Maybe a metaphor also, I don't know how good is this metaphor, but it's like people ask like, how does the Voyager, like how does like a satellite or like a spaceship use a planet to like travel faster? Where like it doesn't make sense, right? It's like there's a planet here and you circle it or like you get close to it and then you go elsewhere. How is that actually giving you energy, right? Like it's really just like no, you're lowering your potential energy, increasing your kinetic, but then like you're not going to get extra energy by just doing that. Does this make sense? Like it's kind of puzzling.
Maybe continue with the elaboration.
Yeah. I mean, because for example, for the Voyager, they use planets to increase the energy and make them travel way faster. Well, the way this works is that actually the planet is moving in a certain direction, right?
Yeah.
So essentially, if you time it just right, and you send the satellite so that it's on the tail, right? It's like it's catching the planet as the planet is receding. The planet is gonna drag the satellite, and it's kind of like pulling it and giving it energy.
Right.
And in fact, the planet is gonna lose some energy. But I mean, a tiny amount, right? Because boosting a satellite is nothing compared to the momentum of the planet. But that is how it works. And actually, you could do it wrong. Or like if you send the satellite in the opposite direction, like this is actually gonna slow it down because, and the satellite is gonna be giving the energy to the planet. So a lot of kind of like what system is giving energy to what system can be modulated by alignment and phase and in what direction they're moving.
Yeah, like when you started talking about this, I guess I had a simple way in which I like wouldn't be surprised by this boosting would be like the visualization of the music of the spheres in but basically just like planet rotation and certain kind of again like harmonic interactions in which these objects can impact each other, but I'm pretty sure that like the true explanation is much more sophisticated rather than the model that I had. But I did once I cannot remember what kind of diagram it was, but I think it was the solar system. I'm pretty sure both of you have also seen it. Are there like nodes and antinodes in the relationship between the planets, and that there are certain spots then that they are actually used for satellites because they're like these stable points between these revolutions that can then sort of like support like movement of the satellites.
Yes, well, there is also what's called the Lagrangians, which are special points in orbits, where if you can just put something there and remove its momentum, or essentially like make it go. Yes, exactly. Make it go as fast as the planet, essentially, is not gonna move from there.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, the thing is like there's always gonna be a little bit of noise, and like eventually, actually, it's gonna drift off. But if you have like a cybernetic system, or you have like some, like boosters and jet engines, you can just correct it a little bit, and it doesn't take a lot of energy to just keep it there.
Yeah. I mean, I like to think about these things on a scale-free kind of way.
Yeah.
So, like, if you would apply again certain kind of like rotations in the cosmic, like on a cosmic scale or in a solar system, like how could they be applied to the subtle body maybe, or things like that? Because if you look at this, like the model itself again has some resemblances to like the toroidal shape that people might perceive in like meditation or in certain psychedelics and things like that.
Yeah.
And then maybe chakras and resonance, metronome behavior, because like again it's oscillations.
Yeah, this is super interesting. I hadn't thought of it this way, but I could imagine that, like, for example, in an internal conflict, God and the devil inside you, they're like, well, most of the ways you can approach that conflict will probably suck you in one way. It's like, oh, you're gonna be part of the team God or team devil, just as an example. But there's probably Lagrangians in your consciousness, where like if you stand your awareness or your attention just here, it doesn't pull you one way or the other.
Yeah.
In fact, I think probably a lot of advanced meditation is something like that, like finding Lagrangians, but for your attention.
Yeah.
So like it doesn't pull you in one way or the other. It's just perfectly balanced.
Yeah, great skill.
Or if you wanna stay in the all models are wrong but some are useful, as in more predictive or higher ambivalence, then that seems to be also this kind of problem. To not get sucked by any model fully.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yes.
Now this sounds like giving out a warning to not get caught up in any kind of like too big of a semantic kind of narrative if you're dealing with potentially some difficult energetic experiences, but mainly like to focus on the sensory input and the attention instead of even if you would feel like God and the devil, but to try to perceive it neutrally, as in some kind of opposite kind of energy sinks that are trying to grab your attention. But before we move on to neuroacoustics, like, what do you think about this question that came up? How should someone like pay attention on not to get fried by raising the energy too much in an uncontrolled way? What crosses your mind here?
The most important part is figuring out how to distribute and homogenize the energy. That the real problem, kind of like getting burnt or harmed, is uneven energy. I mean, one physiological way of thinking about it is, well, the body is kind of like a pressure management system, is one of the things that it is doing. And I think I'm actually suspect that like one of the things that anxiety is responsible for, that you have like these fairly random vibrations coming up that don't sync up, and like you don't have like harmony during anxiety, is like actually the thing that you are afraid is that you will hit on kind of a very unfortunate random combination of vibrations where the pressure concentrates too much somewhere in your body. It kind of like causes a blowout, or like essentially physiological strain. But it's kind of like a random thing. Like, let me give you an example. Let's say you have like like an object, like a spaceship or something, or a satellite actually might be a good example. If the satellite can probably endure quite a bit of energy, if it is channeled to its resonant modes in a way where the resonant modes are consonant with each other. Because in that case, the energy and the strain and stress is evenly distributed. That's like would be a high valence configuration for the satellite. But if you're energizing dissonant resonant modes, what will happen is that some parts of the satellite will actually be like being very wildly pushed apart. And so there's going to be some regions, especially where the beat patterns are happening, or like where the sharp part of the beat patterns are happening, where you will have like very uneven, highly concentrated stress. And so you risk actually shaking it apart and like it getting broken up.
Yeah.
I think it's quite similar that like the problem with energy is uneven energy. Like, for example, like, well, in your whole system, like you're at a concert or something, you're like on amphetamines or whatever, and the energy like unfortunately gets like hyper concentrated in your left ear, and then you get tinnitus in your left ear, or it gets hyper concentrated in like your heart and you get like some valvular, disease or something, or in your stomach and you get like diarrhea, whatever it may be. Whereas like the very high valence, high energy states are precisely those where the energy is homogeneously distributed and you're kind of like evenly heated up.
Yeah.
Concentration of power is danger everywhere.
True.
Could you imagine, so like in cases when, let's say, a fourth path or enlightenment, so in the cases of such meditation, people are practicing semantically neutral energy.
Yes.
Or you could also, I mean, I'm thinking about a case of such a self-collapse where you are potentially not like amplifying the semantically neutral energy, but maybe deity or some kind of loving figure, Do you think there is some kind of threshold there in the system which can then like cause such a phase shift? Is the question clear?
No, not exactly. Can you elaborate? Yeah.
Okay, maybe I will just ask this first. What do you think happens in the context of this thermodynamic framework when someone during meditation experiences phase shifts or certain kind of transitions that can be either temporary or maybe permanent? Like, this is where I was thinking about a certain threshold and how to like conceptualize that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things. I mean, when somebody says like I had a shift in meditation, there probably could be like 15 different things in very different categories. Things such as like, oh, they unlocked a new source of energy. That could be one shift in meditation. Could also be like they dealt with or like they re-annealed an internal representation that was causing dissonance, and okay, like that is improved in their life and they don't have that anymore. But yeah, probably one of the biggest ones is the removal of blockages that allows for attention waves to actually move in a more geometric way, and kind of like that, what that feels like is, well, rather than your attention getting caught up in a very particular structure somewhere in your body or somewhere in your mind, it feels like freeing. That attention now can just travel in space.
Yeah, so what I meant by putting in contrast cultivating semantically neutral energy or maybe meditating on a deity, you can basically dissolve some of those blockages with both approaches.
Mm-hmm.
Only, like, I guess one approach would then basically anneal the deity,
Yes.
and you would have it as an energy source.
Yes. Yes. I mean
I think something like that happened to me basically.
deity annealing.
Yeah, Avalokiteshvara
Yeah.
being in the background through the day after,
Yeah.
after annealing and
Yeah.
merging.
Right.
Yeah.
I have that experience similar.
Yeah. I mean, I think like deity annealing is like it's morally neutral. Like it's neither good nor bad. It is more like there's like some side. There's pros and cons essentially.
Right, for sure.
Maybe to translate, since for some people know Avalokiteshvara as I think Guang or something. In Chinese it is a
Guanyi, I
different
think,
name.
or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and it also has different genders and
That's true.
somewhere it has no genders. It's deity of compassion
Yeah.
or of love.
Yeah. I think I annealed to the concept of muse.
Mm-hmm.
Like but it happened like spontaneously, where it was just so like beautiful and energizing, and I was like very pulled towards this idea, you know. I mean, they, mythologically speaking, they are also like connected to the gods, and I have this experience that like it is an energy source in the back, like at the background of my being somehow. Luckily, yeah, not like whispering creepy stuff, as unfortunately some people might have, like when they anneal something like magical creatures that are maybe, yeah, not always super benign.
Yes.
But it is definitely a source for me, as maybe this deity for you, as like a very kind of like positive, motivating phenomenon that boosts the creativity.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Several things about deity annealing. I mean, one is like, I think it is like you're giving your mind permission to create like an idealized being, and therefore, well, it is like a representation of an entity, but without all of the things that would be causing blockages otherwise. But it's almost kind of like an entity stripped out of all of the symmetry breaking that usually comes when you represent an entity. And as a consequence, it functions as a very high valence consonant metronome.
Yes.
And okay, like the valence perspective, valence structuralism accounts for quite a bit of this. The other thing too is that I think it can function as an energy storage, essentially. That like as you focus on it and you energize it, that energization lingers throughout the day, and like it kind of like slowly dissipates after a while. I mean, that you're carving those grooves. The grooves will last a long while, but if you stop energizing it, if you stop interacting with it, it does kind of like die out or like dry.
Yeah.
You dry out over time, right?
I have experience, yeah.
So like people who do like bhakti yoga, they're like 8 hours a day or 16 hours a day just energizing the thing. Eventually, yeah, it becomes like an LSD-like, super intense like energy source.
Mm-hmm.
But it is, I think, yeah, like energy that you have put into it. And that is one of the key differences, I guess, between non-duality and like dualistic approaches. That if you're treating the entity as if it was like a fundamentally different,
Mm-hmm.
like being, you're kind of creating this partition in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And also it might be a little bit dangerous on some level. Like there's like ways in which that can go wrong.
I also like wanted to mention that
Yeah.
to prevent this division, you
Yeah.
match with it, then it starts overwriting your self-representation. Or if you make it a non-local representation, then it's basically starts to appearing all over the experience, non-locally. And then it's not locked to some subspace of experience.
I like that.
And I also did that a lot, basically.
have a look at this Vara in every atom and in
Yeah.
every part of the world.
In the Andrés net.
In the internet, exactly. I love that. Yeah, because I mean, it is, common for psychosis. I mean, I get a lot of messages from people wanting to share their psychoses, right, and things like that, which I love. I don't have enough time to respond to everybody, obviously, but
Yeah.
but yeah, it's sometimes like if you energize like a deity, and you don't have like very well developed metta and equanimity, what happens is you can imprint kind of like more craving and human emotions into it and assign those emotions to it, and then if you have been doing this in a fairly dualistic way, literally that can take over. And like there's deity possession, right? And also just like horrible adversarial relationships that people can develop. Like just an example, somebody was like going from like, oh, God is my best friend, to like God is threatening me that if I don't do what he wants, he's gonna torture me forever, right?
That's common in schizophrenia.
Yeah.
Getting punished.
Yeah.
By angels or gods. Very, very.
Exactly.
intense.
So one has to be quite careful about like. I mean, I think a little bit here and there, like, oh, you're gonna do deity yoga for 10 minutes together with, chanting or something. Fine. But no, if you start doing it like every day for several hours, you have to. You really need to talk to a teacher or talk to people who are more advanced, because this is one of like the dangerous practices.
Also, there seems to be a spectrum between how much anthropomorphize that cluster of coherence gets. So like when someone says that, for example, the fields of consciousness are the fields of love, that seems to be much less anthropomorphized.
Yeah.
So as a result, it can also have much less agentic properties while still having meta. But it can be more anthropomorphized, and then it's like the conscious universal being is like just pure love. But if you give it the being property, then it can have all the agentic properties.
Yes.
I like that.
Active inference agent, possibly.
I was thinking about something similar, like in the context of like thermodynamic efficiency or the energy transfer within, then like in the context of annealing, like the nervous system, or again, if you want to take it a bit more scale free, maybe like the collective intelligence or something like that, where from the perspective that you mentioned, if you have the perception of the universe as pure love, so, and you anneal that, what kind of shape is it? Probably like a very symmetrical shape in which smooth, yes, as well, where different nodes are basically arranged in these regular kind of intervals where they can communicate or like send information more easily, basically, or like the sub-agent integration, just like take that again, scale free. So I don't know, I really like this because, maybe you can anneal into, or like anneal pure love into your model as like, this is that the qualia fields are fields of love, and without necessarily giving that a name of a deity or anything else, but thinking of it just in terms of being the most thermodynamically efficient shape that could facilitate good energy.
Oh, that's great. That just gave me a interesting idea. I mean, you could visualize. I had never thought of something like that explicitly.
Okay.
But you could probably think of special shapes for like a deity.
Yeah.
That would have a bigger impact.
Yeah.
Because but we have to be careful, because I mean, one example is the difference between just like a sphere radiating heat relative to like a sphere with spikes. If the spikes themselves are very conductive of temperature, then actually that will radiate out faster because it has like more surface area, right? The problem though is like because of Gestalt properties.
Like Corona.
Yeah, like Corona, exactly. Corona is just radiates its heat faster. It just has a more efficient heat dissipation. The problem though is that like because of the spikes, it would be lower valence. But I think there's like ways of increasing the surface area, you know, maybe with hyperbolic surfaces and things like that, while maintaining consonance or even increasing consonance. So I could imagine something like the helicoid, you know, Avalokiteshvara version or something like that, which is like this hyperbolic surface kind of like kale that is like very symmetrical and beautiful, and like your visualization is of that, and like you think that is Avalokiteshvara. Now that would have like so much surface area with like everywhere else in your consciousness that like probably would just impact you a lot more, as opposed to visualizing it as just a sphere, for example, because well, limited surface area really. But the big trade-off is going to be between like, surface area, which increases the power of it, versus weird shapes, which may come with negative valence. But I bet there's like some interesting solutions there.
Yeah, nice.
That reminds me of some Indian gods that are like very attackish and spiky.
Oh yeah.
Some of them.
Oh, they might be very energy transfer, very thermodynamically efficient, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
I meant Hindu gods.
Oh, the Hindu gods, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Also, maybe in terms of meta, that we identified that it can be more like local, or that you can send it from a source to a source, so from a representation to a representation. So for example, from your representation to other beings, for example, or the beings, or like the Avalokiteshvara can send meta to you, and it can be more of an agent, or it can be more of a representation that's just not alive in this sense, or
like
alive,
the eternal form.
Yeah, alive in non-human way or non-organism way, and there seems to be also this dimension of grabbiness that the representation can have, either the source or the what is receiving.
Yes. I think that is also a key thing. That if you're approaching like a deity representation with craving, in some like grabbiness essentially, as opposed to using it to reduce grabbiness, right? Like I mean that is that's a great use, right? Like imagining Avalokiteshvara helping you deal with your cravings and lessen them, and like okay, that's great. But if instead you approach it as like a romantic attraction, or like as I don't know, like in the search of power or things like that, it's like I want to be connected to God because then I'll be more powerful or more important or something.
Then you need higher order Avalokiteshvara.
That's right. Yeah, if you do that, then I think that's much more likely for the entity to like actually turn against you, because the entity itself will have desires and cravings, and I mean I guess like the Old Testament probably was a lot like that, like these jealous gods.
Yeah, I think there is some wisdom from Goethe's Faustus, where Faustus said like if you put me in chains, I will disappear. You know, like you cannot just extract the energy from the deity from your own purposes, because then like it will simply lose its initial role.
Yes.
Also one more thing, I feel like that people often say they cannot do meta because it feels like it's not real enough, like the representation they are sending meta towards. So maybe there's also identifiable degree of freedom in this state space, that how the representation corresponds to a real object in real life, either that might be even like next to you. It's easier to send a meta to someone that's sitting next to you versus someone that's completely somewhere else, versus to some imagined deity, you could say, or if you have different ontology, it can be
exactly
deity that's real in idealist sense, for example.
Yeah.
So that seems to be also like when people wanna practice metta and just cannot do anything. It's maybe good to practice it interpersonally, as of to unlock it first, much more, or but also from the other person, since there seems to be that people also cannot do metta because they just don't feel loved from the environment, which doesn't let them love the environment.
Yeah.
So there's a blockage there, I feel like.
Yeah, maybe a little bit long topic, but like the thing that makes me think of is, I mean, like, yeah, how do you maximize the meta transfer is actually, I think, like an interesting non-trivial optimization problem, because it's not just maximize surface area. It is close to that. I mean, and again, like if you have representations of your ontology, the surface area is going to be larger. Somebody close to you, either psychologically or physically, more surface area. But then you also have the issue of like, well, the vibrations might be in the golden ratio, right? Like, so just because you have a lot of surface area doesn't mean you'll be able to send vibrations to it.
Maybe in general symmetries of the representations, the more similar, the more compatible, more like the more consonant.
Yes, but then you also need some space in between.
Yeah.
Because if the surface area is too large, and you actually just become it, then you don't have this like slight kind of like separation that allows you to actually send waves to it.
Or you can do like sending
waves to itself. Yeah, I guess it would be with a different technique.
Endomorphism. Morphism from itself to itself, basically.
Like, how do I vibrate myself? So
sending metta from yourself to yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or from the fields of consciousness to the fields.
There you
go. More non-dually, which I prefer much more.
Yes.
I will add that as the most skilled approach here for the masters of sending metta from a field to a field.
The fundamental field of love, sending love to the fundamental field of love.
Exactly.
Yes.
Step 12 on our list. Are you ready to move forward?
Yeah.
So, in neuroacoustics diagnosis, is there something besides CDNS that should be elaborated?
I mean, I'm guessing, especially for the future, like as we improve upon these technologies, there's going to be a cornucopia, a panoply of different approaches to essentially quantify, diagnose your neuroacoustics. I mean, right now there are these PIC, I think is a technique where they do transcranial magnetic stimulation, like just a big pulse, and then they look at your EEG. And I mean, this is a technique to determine like how conscious you are. I mean, just like a very good correlation. It's a good, neural signature. And what happens is that the more aware and conscious you are, the longer the echoes of the pulse can be seen in the EEG. So like if you're actually, kind of in a coma, there's no echoes, or there's almost no echoes. Like the EEG comes back to normal almost immediately. Versus like if you're completely wide awake and not sleepy, then the echoes last for much longer. I don't think they have done this with psychedelics, but I would just bet so much money that like on psychedelics the echoes last a lot longer.
But would they then also last longer in states of higher lucidity?
Maybe not, because sometimes high lucidity involves a lot of energy dampening potentially. But I guess like there's some slight conceptual differences here in that like one thing might be kind of the fidelity of information transfer, which lucidity has for sure. I'm gonna close the window for the noise. Oh, it's not the windows.
I think it's the cleaning actually in front of the doors, Or like in a state of a certain kind of philosophical or spiritual euphoria, which might have some resemblances to like a...
Some snacks,
Oh, nice. Like it's like a psychedelic state?
So you're gonna have like vegan Kit Kat? I haven't tried but
Interesting.
that's interesting.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Also, I'm gonna use the restroom real quick.
Uh-huh. Should I pause the recording or?
No, it's fine. If anybody is really interested in these, like, they'll, I don't know, it's more real, right?
Let's be real.
Let's be real.
More organic.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I also mentioned one more thing to Andrés. That you can, I feel like that you can also, like, in terms of creating love between two representations, that you can do it also, like, to math itself. Math.
Ah. Yeah, for sure. But I cannot really imagine it would be very functional for someone who doesn't already like have some affection
Yeah.
towards it. I mean, basically any, let's say, any discipline or field that might cause you personally pleasure, curiosity and motivation, that you can then cultivate some meta there as you would towards a phenomenon.
Yeah. Hmm. Maybe also, Andrés, I was thinking, like, to explain, for example, the some of phenomenology of some mathematicians, that probably they have very generalized what two representations can fall in love in their mind, so they can their self-representation can fall in love with some math field, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. I think. I think mathematicians are actually quite interesting in terms of their self-representations.
Yeah.
That, like, they have, like, maybe different hands. I mean, like, they obviously have the same hands as everybody, but they also have other inner hands and different ways of grabbing into representations that allow them to resonate with them.
Also, like, yeah, maybe in general, like, how, like, for example, I think it was Hilbert or someone, like, people that see themselves as a mathematical system probably literally implemented these kinds of representations in their self-model.
Yeah.
Which might be our case also.
Yeah, I think like talking or thinking about these things is usually extremely energizing for me. It feels like it's unlocking some new avenues where certain kind of philosophical or like discovery euphoria can be unlocked.
Yes.
All right, so we have this like PIC,
Yes.
CDNS.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Okay. A few more things about neuroacoustic diagnosis. I mean, I think this is not something I have invested a lot of time in, but I'm gonna imagine that you could do this with sensory input quite a bit. Like, okay, so like one typical example is after a psychedelic experience, especially early on, if you've never had one, there can be like a very big shift in neuroacoustics. Like I know a lady who, I think she's in her late 50s or something, and finally tried mushrooms. Well, she actually had like a high dose of mushrooms with a therapist, like 3 grams or something. She didn't feel that much actually, or like it was strong, but like not that strong. After I think like two sessions with mushrooms, then every time she listens to music, now she feels the vibrations in her body. So like that is like enhanced neuroacoustics straightforwardly. in general, not for every type of meditation, but broadly speaking, the principal component of meditative progress tends to be neuroacoustics enhancement. Like, essentially waves propagate more between different media, and like they're all kind of like, yeah, more capable, essentially fewer blockages, right? Like that's like another frame.
Yeah.
And so I think like probably, you know, for the annealing salon or things like that, these could be systematized, where, for example, you say, okay, with this music, like, please tell us where in your body you're feeling vibrations. And like the music is very carefully constructed. So you're actually sampling from different parts of the spectrum or different types of consonance and dissonance. And then you come up with a diagnosis. I mean, maybe even like, could be objective. I mean, the dream would be like, you actually use like a digital stethoscope to like map out how like vibrations in your body are actually being propagated.
Mm-hmm.
And then you could have like a result, you know, a report that says, hey, your neuroacoustics are like clean and consonant in the meso frequencies, but they're like messed up in the high frequencies. And so then like you would do like annealing techniques specifically for high frequencies, for example.
Wow.
Or for different sense modalities. It's something like, oh yeah, your visual field is kind of blocked. So here's like this type of strobing with this music. It will increase the neuroacoustics there.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like that. Also, reminded me of this paper that I haven't yet read, but I bookmarked it, one of the recent papers of Michael Levin, like that basically signaling stress would be, I believe, like one of the fundamental, let's say, like communication methods in the cognitive glue that he describes, like between like the collective intelligence in his terms.
Yes.
So
stress signaling. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. I mean, like the gestalts emitting, like dissonant gestalts emitting waves. It is in a sense, yeah, like an intelligent process that is telling the system, hey, there's like concentrated stress here, and we're risking strain.
Yeah.
One conceptual thing, maybe also very broadly for annealing in general, is that stress is 100% fine. The problem is strain, which is like when stress deforms the material.
Yes.
Like I'm sure if you play with kind of like a plastic bag or something, rather than just stretch it, it stays, stretched. So that is called like plastic deformation.
Yes.
And so like one of the risks of like concentrated energy is like plastically deforming some internal representations.
Yeah.
Or maybe the worst case scenario is like organs, actual physiology, like stressing the heart. You take a hit of crack or meth, super highly concentrated energy on the heart, that like is gonna cause like problems down the line, things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, I hadn't thought of it as explicitly as like a feature of collective intelligence, but it makes a lot of sense. Of course, like it has to be properly calibrated, right? Like the problem is that this region is a complainer.
Yeah.
Right, like no matter like tiny parts of stress, it just like freaks out and like sends those signals.
It's I guess one of the things that makes biologists debate a lot the sentient status of plants, in which they are basically just they can like chemically signal stress to each other. So I don't know if you think about stress dissipation or energy management of some kind of more like fundamental mechanism in sentient organisms, then in the context of collective intelligence, it would make sense that signaling stress would be some kind of like an important communication method in order for the collective to maybe like share resources or self-organize in a different way that would let's say like help out the stressed subagent. I mean, which is like what trees and plants basically do on a certain level. But yeah, stress and strain is a good perspective.
Yeah, no, and I think, I mean, a lot of equanimity also has to do with like not being afraid of stress as much. Partly also because like if you're afraid of the stress, you may actually make it worse. Or like if the whole system freaks out that like, oh, there's a lot of stress in this region.
That generates higher order stress.
Yeah, exactly. Which of course, like for evolutionary reasons, it makes sense that like, well, it is like pushing you to act, right? But then again, like we're not necessarily super well calibrated to the current environment. And so, I mean, the classic example of like unnecessary stress is you're gonna go do a test, in math, like in your math class or something, and you're all stressed out, and the stress is actually preventing you from thinking, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of the kind of like the feedback loops that, like panic attack, you can think of it as like subsystem is signaling stress, the whole system gets stressed out about that, and that intensifies the stress of the subsystem, and then you get a feedback loop.
That intensifies.
Should we move to the next chapter?
Yeah.
So now we have information valence trade-offs.
Yeah. So that is also kind of like a subtle, nuanced discussion, because like you do see a lot of people like falling into like just like very low complexity states that feel good, but then like effectively, because if they only hang out in there, they may lack like enough information content in their experience to properly represent complex situations. And so really what you want is like what is the minimum viable representation that I can have?
Prevent underfitting, but also overfitting.
Exactly. Yes, like what is the good fit? And it's very subtle because like, I mean, some of these like low complexity, high valence representations are very seductive. I mean, and I would argue that actually things like deity yoga have the side effect of impaired epistemology, because you end up thinking in very simple terms. I mean, like if you're only thinking, oh, we're all one all the time, you're not going to be able to model complex social situations because that information is lost. But the ideal is actually to have the flexibility. You can construct and deconstruct representations at will without problems. You have the ability, like how to construct them, and how to deconstruct them gracefully, essentially.
Proper Bayesian updating.
Yeah, proper Bayesian updating. And but I think that, this is like an advanced thing and like very subtle, and like I think, I mean, again, it depends on like your capabilities and ethics. Like for a lot of people, actually, let's say like deity yoga with impaired epistemology may actually be totally fine, because if they're holding a family, they don't need that high quality philosophy epistemology. Hey, the culture can work, like the community can work. And I have an aesthetic distaste for that personally, but that's because I'm very, very much into like high fidelity of information, right? But yeah, no, like when I retire, when I'm 70 years old and like I'm not gonna produce any more content, like maybe I'll just hang out in like those spaces all the time. I don't know.
It seems to work as a great social stabilizer. Yeah. But now it feels like with increasing complexity of the world, it's harder and harder to make it work.
Yeah.
On a higher scales.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I was joking that like like there's probably like only 70 people in the world who actually have an accurate model of world politics. Everybody else just has like a underfeeded, like, oh, there's the good guys, the bad guys, like China is the bad guy, or like whatever it may be, right? Capitalism is bad, like all these like just very, very simple representations, like kid-like, right? It's like the goods, the bads, or look, like they're on horses and they have weapons, they're coming at you, like join the military. like that's not like a subtle representation at all, right? So we do want like leaders, we do want the people who are in charge to actually be very mindful of the trade-off between complexity and valence.
And when we try to put or throw math at it, such as like complex adaptive systems and cybernetics and stuff like this, one can get extremely lost in the complexity and computational irreducibility and stuff like this.
Exactly, there might be like computationally intractable problems for
and
us.
chaotic also factors.
Yeah, so something like what is the adage? Like, God, give me the strength to. There's probably something funny here to say. There's something like
give me the strength to like not try to change things that I cannot. It's something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Change the things that I can. Accept the things that I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah.
So like, give me the high fidelity information of the things I can predict. Give me like.
And have agency over.
And I have agency over. Give me like simple high valence representations for the things I can't predict, and then the wisdom.
No agency over.
The wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah.
Nice.
But these people who potentially have very like low complexity models, but have integrated a certain kind of deity metronome, sound like a good, basically like a good metronome to have within a society.
Yeah.
If you would have some kind of role distribution where not everyone would have this idea or the pressure that we currently have in a very competitive society, that you're supposed to be chasing power, wealth, or something like that, but that like basically within the role distribution you would have those who are inclined to like complexity enhancement, adaptation and learning, and then those who are like just radiating out a consonant vibe and are serving as a kind of a like mothers or like the smootheners of the society.
Yes, who tell you like, yeah, everything is fine, it's simple, life is simple. And actually, yes, like actually I would say that having those people in society and being prominent metronomes actually also simplifies society, so that then you can actually predict it better, and that can be good. Like essentially having like strong attractors like that in groups of people allow you to coordinate with each other.
Yeah.
I mean, that is why, you know, like a group that is all deluded, but deluded in the same way, and it's a simple delusion, can actually act as a unit quite effectively.
Yeah.
Maybe also you like this quote that lowbrow memes are information propagation optimal. It is the typical information packet of any high memetic fitness message. Nuance has low transmittivity through the replication channel.
Who came up with that?
I think origin, not sure. Yeah, from Bev Jesus.
Oh, Bev Jesus. Excellent.
And yeah, I feel like this really explains a lot why lots of the dominating replicators are like very low nuance.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Which isn't really how science sees the world, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah, that might also be like, yeah, the suffering of the nerds, that like if you're the only nerd in your family,
yeah.
like the way the family is held together is with these low complexity representations, and then the nerd is like, no, but this is more complex, and like that's perceived as an attack to the group actually, right? And so it's just something to be mindful of. And
yeah.
But I don't know, I'm betting on like we can actually have like a sane, you know, core metaphysics that functions as this, which would be something like team consciousness, and you know, I was telling Libor like the central generators that I think like you can get all of QRI out of is literally, I think I also said that it's oneness, so that you care about everybody. Second one is math, so that you actually count, you care about numbers. And the third one is valence realism. I think if you have those three, then yeah, rationality comes out of that, like hedonistic consequentialism, but also like hedonic technologies. A lot of things come out of that combination, and maybe a group can anneal to that.
Right. So in a QRI kind of parallel universe, these three would be taught in kindergarten.
Exactly.
And empiricism.
Yes,
We
yes,
start
yes,
with that.
yes. Yeah, like you have the oneness week and then the
Yeah.
the math week and the
Yeah, I think I'm discovering this hidden marketing aspect of myself, where I mean I do think that like people who are a bit like comparatively more lucid and do have children, I could imagine that they would maybe prefer to send their child to such a kindergarten
yeah.
rather than a public one where they already know that you know there are certain values that are potentially like propagated there that they don't necessarily support, but they don't have other options. I think it's one of the core themes in this sci-fi novel that was actually recommended to me by Michael Johnson, which is called The Diamond Age, A Young Lady's Primer. By Neil Stevenson, and it's about a like nanotechnology engineer who created this book that is like very interactive, and basically this young girl from a poor family ends up with this like very unique and basically expensive new technology. Like she has the book and the book navigates her, you know, through her challenges. You know, she was born and raised in a highly dysfunctional family, but with the book she actually becomes a princess and like has like wonderful you know, like manners, and has like these kind of QRI qualities in a certain way, but yeah, I don't know. I wonder if any kind of reform officially could even like happen to. I don't know if these places are like would be legally allowed.
I think so. I mean, there are like a lot of alternative schools, right, and things like that.
But would you have to have a certain kind of curriculum that would be like approved by the state or something like that?
Yeah, I think maybe the place to look into is like charter schools that are given a lot of freedom to kind of like do what they want. I guess also in places like Mexico. I mean, my elementary school was. I mean, I have so many fond memories of my elementary school, but it was a joke of a school. It worked great for me because like we had like almost no homework and almost like no classes. So I could literally just like spend. I could spend most of the time just like talking to my best friend, and that's it, right? Like, and I had to do almost nothing else, and like it was just a very beautiful school, and like almost just nothing. I mean, and then the things that we did have to do were like very silly and had no educational value, but it was like such a small amount of time relative to the year. But yeah, in Mexico you can probably get away with quite a bit of like alternative education. Especially like in elementary school.
No.
Or it could be in some network state.
Yeah, network states actually. Suzalu's kindergarten, Suzalu's elementary school.
I really think this could be like so important, because while the children are still in this like highly flexible state of mind, not already like maybe entering university, you can kind of better maybe like implement is a very bad word, but like learn some of those pro-social values that might be aligned to the team consciousness goals, rather than, you know, like when someone is 30, it's way more difficult.
Yeah.
We've arrived to chapter 6, which is state stabilization techniques.
Yes.
Okay, like how is this different from energy dampening?
Yeah. Yeah, because it's not directional. I mean, energy dampening is like lower energy. It's actually changing the state, right? Whereas state stabilization is how you turn this state into the homeostatic attractor of your system. What Wisten says, I mean, this is like, I think a lot of teachers say this, but I first heard it from Wisten very clearly, was the way he describes practice is, yeah, do a technique until you notice a shift in your perception, and then just do nothing and hang in that shift and try to make it permanent. But and like that step is often like missed, I think. So for example, for like Zen, Dzogchen type practices where you're focusing on just the entire field of experience all at once, and like, well, during meditation maybe you're kind of like struggle to like, well, I'm paying attention to this part, I'm paying attention to this part, but then slowly you anneal to like, okay, now I'm like right here and it's like a symmetrical point, I'm paying attention to the whole field. Wistana would say like, yeah, just hang in there and like don't move and stay there for as long as possible without doing anything else, because the longer time you hang out in like this new attractor, the more it becomes stable. But don't try to like energize it, don't get excited about it, like don't say like, oh, I have to tell everybody, because that will destabilize it.
Of course.
It's a very private practice, is you just stay there for as long as you can. And I mean, essentially what they say is that, yeah, like those glimpses of fully deconstructed states, like non-duality states, like the whole point is like that at first you only access them in meditation, but then they actually stabilize and you keep them with you all the time.
Frank Yang describes nicely also that the goal that he says as, or he defines enlightenment as the ability to be constantly in like the infinite consciousness, while the experience, the classic sensory data are like infinitely small point in it. So that's like one possible higher order prior basically, which where stuff that's happening in sensory data doesn't stress you, since it's so like relatively to infinite consciousness, it's so tiny.
Yes, that's also very related to something Daniel Ingram, a technique that he emphasizes, which is when you have like pain or discomfort, to notice that it's a tiny percentage of your experience, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's bad here, but but actually all of this experience, like there's often typically going to be some aspect of your experience that feels good or neutral at least. So you can, as you expand your awareness, you're going to dissolve or dilute, at the very least you're going to dilute the negative valence components. And it sounds like the Frank Yang, you're like, sensor input is an infinitesimal component of the infinite consciousness that's at the limit, right? Is the asymptote.
I would actually argue that's something like what Max Tegmark's, like his like infinite maths universe is something similar.
Yeah.
That, or like the multiverse ontology seems to also like create such a phenomenology. Right? Like when every time any higher order prior that just makes the current experience very relatively to the whole field, like very small percentage, that seems to be in general they have this property.
Yeah.
Would you be able to point out what would be like the stage before? So like how does a person then who is inexperienced get to unlock this perception in which something that they used to identify with a lot, like an uncomfortable feeling or representation, can then later get compared to such a big field of consciousness, you know? Like, to me this is very logical, but also like an advanced step already.
Yeah.
Like,
I think aesthetics matter a lot to what kind of type of higher order prior you get attracted towards. So hyper philosophical people will like stuff like Max Tegmark's multiverse, and people that are less into maths and more into non-techi meditation, more spirituality, they would go more towards the infinite consciousness one, and then people on the intersection love both.
I'm thinking of the questions that could potentially ease this path to people who are not highly or like hyper philosophical or very intellectual in this way as maybe we are. So
I feel like, for example, 5 meal gives you this glimpse, and then you can like at least imagine it like vaguely, because you cannot really imagine 5 meal DMT state. I feel like at least like experiential.
yeah.
But like some very high energy annealing techniques, like that just cause something similar. I feel like could get you much closer to that.
Yeah, I'm thinking, okay, so if somebody is like really not philosophical, right, and is struggling to do this move, I'm thinking if things such as like, well, imagine you're at your school or at a party or a gathering, and like at first you're like very immersed in like the conversation you're having or the people you're talking to, but then like keep imagining that like, no, actually you're the whole party. And like this is just one conversation out of a lot of things that are happening, or other things that might be relatable to people.
Simple meta move.
or what seems to also Michael Taft do is well, he does it through the compassion route. So imagine the suffering of first, like slowly expanding the care of concern, basically. Like first your big, like most significant, most like closest significant others or closest friends, so like family and friends or pets. So that's like the first move. Then you like slowly expand to your community and imagine all their like sufferings and imagine how they are getting out of it more better. Slowly releasing the suffering, or Avelikato Shvara eats the suffering. And then then you can go like to the whole nation, to the whole planet, to all aliens, to all multiverses, and expand more and more and more. But this goes slowly, like it's an hour of meditation, so what I just described. And if you do this constantly, it seems to induce this in the end, that in the end you can care about suffering in all multiverses, basically.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Practicing the gradient, more the expansion gradient, even if it's very tiny at first. But
and what I would also argue, that if you focus it a lot on the compassion, on the suffering, then it also generates your motivation to like help sentient beings much more.
Yeah.
Since I would argue that you anneal representations where people that suffer gets helped and stop suffering, and that's what your brain starts predicting as that it should be happening. And in order to align your internal model with what's happening in the world, you start helping others as a result. So
active inference theory of compassion.
Basically.
I love it.
Way to go, dealing with limit cycles.
Yeah, that's like something that you want to destabilize, actually. I mean, it depends. If it's actually depends on the type of. But the thing that I probably had in mind there is, for example, like loops on LSD. That's or psychedelics. People get trapped in loops. It's pretty uncomfortable usually. Like very strange things. Like people might say something like, "Oh, part of the loop is like realizing that you're in the loop, but you can't do anything about it because you immediately forget, and then like, oh, I'm in a loop, and like, wait, what was I thinking? And like, oh, I'm in a loop. Wait, what was I thinking? And so if you notice that you're in a loop and it's unpleasant, I mean, if it's high valence and like it has good properties, Metta, Equanimity, etc., then stay in the loop. It's probably not bad. But otherwise, probably you should try to shake shake yourself out of it. And like very, very basic things like context shifting is one. Changing music, changing lighting, changing the mood, going to a different room. Other things are like a spike of energy that will just shake you out of the attractor. Like for example, like a short, intense breathing exercise might just do the trick to just get you out of it.
What kind of exercise?
Breathing exercise. You know, I mean, this is the extreme. I don't know if this works, but it's like an example of these. Maybe quite irresponsible, but in the manual, The Psychedelic Experience, by Timothy Leary, Richard Alpert, and Ralph Metzner, it's very funny because they say like, yeah, you know, like a loop may happen, thought loops may happen. Like, here's our suggestion for how to deal with it. And like they say, like this is, you know, you're already on LSD on a high dose and in a loop, and they say like, oh yeah, like the solution is to take a hit of 30 milligrams of DMT to just like really shoot you off of it, and then like
explode the loop.
They also suggest, and I don't think this is a good idea, and like I've never heard anybody else suggest this, but they suggest like taking 20 milligrams of like amphetamine or something to like, I don't know, bring back like cognitive control or something.
Would you recommend something of this in the manual?
I mean, I just think like
a radical intervention.
Right, a radical intervention might be needed in some cases. But the thing is, like, we know so little about how that would work, and I honestly think like it also could make it so much worse.
Locate the limit cycle in brain dynamics and neuromodulate it away. Well, that's technically what depression tends to be for lots of people, some kind of loop or part of it.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that seems what the neuromodulation might be like destabilizing.
Yeah.
But there's also lots of neurobiology hypothesized that's happening there, not just on the belief level.
Yeah.
Yeah, these definitely happen in such trapped sober states of mind, like with addiction or OCD. And yeah, I guess this is something that requires a way more, like a dedicated and a like a longer annealing kind of approach or therapeutic approach, rather than being like take a hit of DMT and escape LSD kind of psychedelic.
Yeah.
But I just want to say that they of course happen on a smaller scale.
Yeah. And then of course a lot of what I think shamanic things are kind of like that. Massive injection of energy to get you out of the attractor.
Right.
And stabilize more high valence attractor instead.
Like
Or stabilize the belief that the shaman has magical powers.
Okay.
All right.
Dealing with noise-driven chaos.
Oh. Yeah, dealing with noise-driven chaos is a configuration of a feedback dynamic system where very tiny amounts of noise get amplified and give rise to very complex chaotic states. I think in those cases there's several things to play with. I mean, one is to play with like actually adding more noise, because like the chaos might be the result of just like what happens when you have a little bit of noise. If you add more noise, it may actually just become like blunted, and like the chaos may stop. The other approach is like try to reduce the noise as much as possible. I mean, I'm thinking like, if you're like in a very sensitive kind of like feedback loop state, a little bit of irritation could actually be quite unpleasant. It gets kind of like fed up into the feedback system. I mean, I guess like a classic example is like benzo withdrawal, where like everything is like positive feedback loops on each other, then like like a little sound outside can be extremely cause like these like chaotic attractors inside. I mean in some cases like all you can do is like get as close as possible to sensory deprivation. That could help. Might not be the most sustainable. And then another possibility is trying to figure out like what is making the state chaotic. This is also maybe kind of fairly theoretical, but in some of the simulations that I have showed you, the chaotic attractors arise when you have this condition where one part of the system is trying to be the same as another, but the other is trying to be different. And so like that's where like it never stabilizes, and it's like these like strange attractors, right? When that happens, presumably that's something you can modulate, and you can essentially try to convince the part of you that is trying to be different, and like no, it's okay, you can actually try to be the same. I mean, I'm thinking like paranoia states of consciousness or a thing like that. When you're like paranoid, you have kind of a self model, and then you're fabricating another self model that is trying to predict this one, but your self model is trying to like run away, right? Like I think this is very evolutionarily ancient. Like a little mouse has like this relationship with like its representation of a cat, right? It's like, oh, the cat is trying to find me, the cat is trying to be like me. What kind of movements can I do that will make it very hard for the cat to catch me? And of course, yeah, this could be very adaptive in situations of threat. But oftentimes, like you're not in any danger, and so maybe the metta meditation where you tell your internal representation of the cat, like, like oh, you're a vegetarian or something, like like changing that dynamic, soothing the negative subagents, so that then like you're not in this chaotic attractor, and instead you just couple into this consonant state.
Right.
Forgiving also.
Yeah, forgiving. For example, yes, if you haven't forgiven somebody or something, you will have kind of this like subtly adversarial relationship to it.
Or what seems to work for some people is to re-anneal for example, after some trauma, to re-anneal the representation, such that you forgive in such a way where you find why the other person like did it, for example. So like in terms of bullies, for example, it's like they were bullying because they were hurt themselves.
Yes.
So it's like they transitively hurt.
Yes.
The person.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So yeah, like shifting the causality possibly to a more higher order. What seems to people also do, that seems to be and sometimes I feel like there's a failure mode, which is naturalistic fallacy basically, where but that can also not be a failure mode, like appeal to nature. It depends on the context. In mental health context it can help a lot.
Yeah.
But in some other context where you say, oh, that's just nature, therefore we shouldn't like do hedonistic imperative.
Exactly.
and reprogram the whole biosphere.
Exactly. Yeah, because exactly if you are representing something or somebody that harmed you with they were just evil.
Yeah.
Then you're actually fabricating evil inside you.
Yeah.
So yeah, if instead you say like, no, this is just a result of causes and conditions, and well, they were messed up for this reason, then forgiving is a lot easier, and you don't have this like evil fabrication.
Yeah. What I feel like there's definitely a sweet spot between acceptance and like changing stuff. I feel like lots of people that meditate a lot just accept too radically. I feel like, but maybe like for some people that's the only way how to like not be in constant suffering.
Yeah.
So in that case, I would encourage it sometimes.
Yeah.
But if whole society would do this while psychopaths would like be in power, that would be very, I think, not net positive for the whole system.
Yeah.
So it's hard to find collective like sweet spot between this. And like maybe that's why lots of the cultures that were a lot at like accepting, they tend to not survive to more like concurring cultures. Since they accept their fate in a sense.
Yeah.
I will quickly go to the toilet before we continue.
Yeah.
But before I do that, just because you mentioned psychopaths, if you want to have a look, I checked out yesterday, because I was mentioning it, this like a narcissist that was interviewed by Kurt J. Mango. Like basically there are these stories where, you know, people had problematic relationships and were in a certain sense socially problematic, but they have no idea that they have a personality disorder. So this happened to this guy in the 80s, when the narcissistic personality disorder was first included in the DSM. And basically he was he did some kind of financial frauds, and he ended up in prison, where a prison psychiatrist first told him, like, okay, we think you have narcissistic personality disorders. He was like, oh, what's that? You know, had no idea. And then spent 4 or 5 years in the prison learning and studying about it.
Oh, wow.
So he was, I just watched it a bit yesterday before I fell asleep, but he's like trying to like make some differences between psychopaths and narcissists. And I think that like by listening to, you know, these people and their personal experience can actually help us to think about these questions that you also just posed, like where, like what kind of approach could you maybe apply in situations where certain people with, or like many people with NPD or BPD basically live off from validation and having these like supplies from the environment. So if you could kind of deprive them of that validation or do some kind of systematic, basically social restructuring in their mental model, there maybe there could be hope for changing it. Because I remember that Robert Sapolsky also, when he wrote about testosterone, said that if you would have a society in which maybe like increasing, you know, happiness or joy or well-being would be the highest value, then that's actually where testosterone would get activated. If that would be the social signaling of certain kind of, you know, reputation, while it's not the case currently, because now it's mainly wealth or money and things like that. So that, you know, testosterone is not tied to aggression or violence or wealth, but to like social status.
That's a good model. Though I wonder if there was a period in history where those seeking power didn't win over everyone, basically, game theoretically. And if you're, and even like you have more game theoretic points if you can convince everyone to give you the power, basically, which honesty doesn't really help there. So that's why it seems like CEOs, like why there is a much bigger percentage of psychopaths among CEOs and politicians than when you sample the average population. But that's I might be too pessimistic about this. there may be some attractor in the social dynamics where this doesn't hold true.
Yeah.
Some stable one.
Well, remember the simulations that I was doing of like in the I don't know game theory. Yeah, I can say it is game theory, but it's evolutionary game theory of of like personality disorders.
Yeah.
There's like a table of which ones affect which ones, and
But I forgot which one won though.
yeah, it's none of them won. But you get like a final kind of like attractor of 3 personality disorders, which was like narcissism, OCD, and borderline personality disorder. And I think the reason is that narcissists can control people with borderline because they know their triggers and they can model them, and they know how to give them like a sense of safety. And the borderline essentially just becomes kind of like an instrument of the narcissist. But then somebody with OCD will bust a narcissist, because the narcissist is constantly claiming credit for a lot of things that they're not actually doing. Just stealing credit from people in general, pretending they came up with ideas that they did, things like that. And the narcissist and the person with OCD, they know how much work different things take, and they're like very meticulous. And so like they can just see through the mask of the narcissist. And then the borderline, then the OCD becomes destabilized by the borderline. So like an OCD person like just has an enormous difficulty dealing with somebody with borderline because they're unstable and like unpredictable, and like maybe the fact that they're unpredictable is maybe evolutionarily adaptive, and like that's one of the reasons like that neurotype exists. So you end up having this rock paper scissors situation.
How does exactly OCD survive though?
Oh, because it's just like very efficient. It actually gets stuff done. It's like it's more of the source of value actually. Except like it's not positive valence. There's other downsides. And also it can be very dysfunctional. There's like some level of OCD where like it can actually be very, very functional. Like a lot of productive people are very, very productive sometimes have OCD. And academics like that. I want to make sure every citation is perfect and formatting and all of these.
How much suffering do you think is included in that state of mind?
Quite a bit. It's OCD seems to be like, serious OCD is just like a constant state of
everything's not perfect.
Everything's not perfect, and you're constantly grasping at control.
Yeah.
You're trying to control things, but you're not trying to control people. You're not trying to own people. There's a big difference. Like the narcissist is trying to gain control over people. The OCD is just trying to predict them so that they don't get in the way.
Yeah, I think. So I knew a person who had a relatively serious OCD, and it seemed really like pretty bad because they were constantly having the feeling that they were doing something wrong and
Yes.
trying to gain just like validation from their environment, that like asking questions such as, do you hate me now? And it seemed very, very like difficult and like low valence, and plus coupled with pretty like bad out of control substance abuse behaviors. But like I don't know, I'm kind of like tidy and like to have things arranged in a row, but I don't think I have like significant any OCD markers. But when it comes to kind of like noticing potentially like a narcissistic, borderline or histrionic person, something like that, it's always to me it's like this kind of attitude where a person is trying to signal something to the whole group that would like increase their sense of worth or like reputation, because other people don't do that. like you don't have to, like if there are like, you know, 6 people hanging out, like you just don't stand up and start talking about your success.
Yeah.
And what because like I noticed that, you know, like then mostly people don't think in these kind of like psychiatric or psychotherapy terms.
Mm-hmm.
They go with the flow.
Yeah.
You know, they're like, oh yeah, you know, tell me more, just play with it. But like if I just observe the person while they're doing it and like look at them without giving them the validation that they want,
Yes.
then I see it crumbles.
Yes.
Then it's slightly like a hint of potential, even panic
Yeah.
in them. I mean, like self-recognition that like the game is not working with someone, and it's kind of like a see-through.
Yeah. Yeah. I know exactly what you mean.
But it's a very
yeah.
painful state, I believe.
Yeah.
It's horrible. And sorry, just one thing that I would like to mention in this context is that I'm still really confused by the difference where apparently people who are diagnosed with ADHD, although like there's high variability, often say or report that they have this very high rejection sensitivity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, you know, like I've met some people that are a bit like histrionic or borderline in that, like just as I described earlier, that kind of like performative kind of behavior, seeking validation. And it's hard for me to differentiate there, because I have the impression that sometimes like people who are on the border of cluster B will use this card and say that like, oh, I'm ADHD and this is my rejection sensitivity. While, you know, like is there any way to even like differentiate there? My very like close friend from Croatia, he is now like he's doing cognitive behavioral therapy and is finishing clinical psychology, PhD, and we talk a lot about these things. And what we both kind of independently arrived to is that like we think that if already in childhood you're kind of showing some symptoms of ADHD or autism spectrum disorder, but basically neurodivergence, and when there's a trauma with that, or like unstable family situation, maybe like witnessing violence or just being exposed to violence yourself, that there's a pretty easy way to fall into cluster B personality disorder, like that it's really coupled tightly with ADHD, for example.
Interesting.
Yeah. Have you thought about this rejection sensitivity
as the core? No, but that makes sense. Let me think. Like I was like one of the frames I was playing with was personality disorders as like latching onto different things.
Yeah, I read that, I think.
And like latching could be a reaction to, well, it's been taken away from you, and so like if it's been taken away from you in a way that you perceived as unfair, you kind of become very protective, and it's like, no, I have to have it all the time with me, and you form a lot of control around it. Let me see. So the idea is something like narcissism would be you're latching on to external validation and admiration. I guess like you just assume and need it all the time. And so like when that is like lessening, you just experience a lot of craving and tanha around like validation. Borderline personality disorder, you're latching on feelings of social safety and fear of abandonment.
Yeah.
Histrionic personality is like you're latching on to attention and approval from others. I think it's like more attention as opposed to like validation. Like a histrionic person, somebody histrionic could actually like, they just embarrass themselves all the time, or like they can embarrass them, like they might care less about like their impression they make.
But just attention.
Just as long as they're getting the attention, yeah. Like maybe the attention is just more intrinsically rewarding for them. Antisocial or like lack of attention is more punishing. Antisocial personality disorder is latching onto personal gratification without taking into account societal norms. It's like, I just want that, and then you pursue it independent of what others think. Obsessive compulsive personality is like you're latching onto control, orderliness, and perfection.
Which one was that?
OCD.
Yeah. I have an impression that like some people who are a bit autistic have been like not necessarily diagnosed, but like afraid that they are like antisocial. Like in Croatia, like where I grew up, also in Zagreb, in the capital, you know, this is maybe like now getting more attention, but like neurodivergence discussions and how basically, you know, it's quite common for people to recognize themselves in one group or another. But my friend committed suicide in 2019, and I remember someone said that like he went to a psychiatrist because he was like suffering a lot because he thought he might be narcissistic. But you know, that it like took me a few years to learn a bit about all of this, and after I came out from my psychotherapy education, it was clear he had like autistic traits and was like quite OCD. You know, just like spending days in a library learning you know, like some exotic Asian languages, having extreme difficulty finding a romantic partner, but we shared the similarity of being sexually attracted to like slightly wacky people, you know, and yeah, unfortunately, like I think he was 28. It was still, you know, we didn't know yet how to talk about these things, but I was thinking, oh my god, like, you know, if only there was one more year or 2 years left, it would be so much clearer also like for us and for him why he was suffering so much. I think that usually like this feeling of potentially, you know, chasing certain goals that are not the social norm necessarily could definitely make one feel isolated or unaligned, and like that they might be causing suffering to their family or their friends, because it's like being an outcast.
I think that's something to mention there for sure is unfortunately I think autism or being on the spectrum by normies oftentimes is perceived as narcissistic,
right?
Because you're like lost in kind of your own world of thinking and ideas and obsessed with it, disregarding like the feelings of others. But it's actually very different than narcissism internally and in behavior, right? And actually also has a heuristic. If you're wondering whether you're a narcissist and like you actually care about it, you very likely are not. And like actually that's I've heard from psychiatrists, like it's actually very common that like if somebody comes in like worried that like oh, am I being narcissistic with my partner, is actually often the case that the partner is narcissistic.
Yes.
and you're just like falling into their mind games. I've
been there. Like in my not very aware like early 20s would like I mean basically what we always do is like, you know, you project your inner world towards other people, at least maybe, you know, when you're not as lucid as you might be after some years of, you know, like doing meditation, studying non-duality and things like that. But this victimization aspect of the narcissist, where you're just not even having this possibility in your head that they would actually be manipulating and asking for something like validation or attention or your resources, because in your world that's like just not a thing, is like unimaginable. So you
Yes.
can get trapped
Yes.
in that.
Massive projections, yeah.
Yeah.
Ah. No, I was once. No, yeah, mind you, like accused of being narcissistic by somebody who was clinically narcissistic, and that was like, yeah, the dynamic is like, okay, this is like a projection of the.
I
image
was
that's
also
happening,
accused. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it your family member?
Oh, I'm not gonna say because I'm
Okay,
recording
sorry.
this.
Oh,
No, it's fine. It's somebody relatively close to me, but not like
Okay.
super close.
we should cut out this question. Yeah, very interesting. There's a bit more here to go through, but like, we can do it in 20 minutes.
we can power through. It's been 2 hours. I mean, it's great. It's a long conversation, very in depth.
Yeah,
I do feel very compelled to actually just post it straight up on.
I agree.
On my channel at least, not necessarily the YouTube one, but the QRI one.
yeah, there will be curious people who might want to watch it through and
Hello.
to-
Put a broccoli emoji in the comments if you got this far.
Right.
Broccoli.
Or cauliflower.
Or cauliflower.
I have broccoli associated with Brian Johnson.
It's coupled, it's over.
Yes.
We've arrived to chapter 9, identifying and addressing negative attractors.
Yeah.
So like from a psychotherapist point of view, I see that like just before engaging with psychedelic therapy or annealing process, it's good to be aware of these potential negative attractors that you're already aware of, that like things that you're maybe running away from, escaping, or trying to avoid, because those are dissonant attractors that will come up during therapy or annealing or a trip. But I wonder, what is your mathematical view on this?
I mean, I think, in terms of identifying and addressing negative attractors, we need a typology. Like, what are they? And like, are they attractors? I mean, like, broadly speaking, it's okay. They're negative either because they're bad for your functionality or bad for your valence. And functionality very broadly defined, right? Like, not only can you be a factory worker, but like, are you going to be able to flourish? And so the question is like, at what level is the negative attractor manifesting? And I think like then like diagnosis becomes very important, because is a negative attractor some feedback loop that you have with your partner, for example? Like that's quite different than like, is a negative attractor like fully self-generated? And I think a lot of probably like blockages in therapy happen when you're misdiagnosing the source of the negative attractor. Like if you actually know, it's like the mixture of the culture and your emotional state and your work, and that mixture is actually the thing that is causing this like dissonant positive feedback loop. Then you know, well, okay, like this is one of the ingredients that I can play with. Like either I change jobs, or I change culture, or I change my attitude. Of course, somebody like Shenzhen Young, who has like a one silver bullet in general, is like, okay, just cultivate equanimity. That's kind of like in the extreme end of like, well, diagnosis doesn't matter all that much. Like, just find like techniques that work in every circumstance. But I think like, for a comprehensive manual, or like at least like a manual that attempts to cover a lot of cases, a little bit of a typology of the possible negative attractors. Okay, so the things that come to mind immediately is at what scale they're happening, or like, is this individual, subagentic, family, culture, or something more broad. At the highest level would be like, are we in the wrong reality? But that's too much. Like, that's our mistake.
That comes to mind, that girl who took lots of DMT on YouTube and was stuck in this is torture by the entities or something like this. That seems to be the most extreme prior, a higher order prior.
Yeah, that's
Or
bad.
or I feel like the Demiurge ontology, like Demiurge demon created this and we have to escape it. I feel like that's also like if it's in this negative valence like context framed, I feel like that can generate constant dissonance as well.
Yeah.
You wanna escape something that's really not escapable.
Yeah. yeah, exactly. The same with like bad trip philosophy things.
Yeah.
Like there's worldviews that like again like I think they're important to reason about, but like it's good not to reify them too much. So that's one thing. The other thing is what type of negative valence or what type of dysfunction is generated. I mean, there are of course like a lot of input from psychiatry, you know, diagnosing manuals. But I'm gonna say from the point of view of like, well, like uniquely QRI perspectives here, it would be something along the lines of what aspect of the world simulation is in a state of dissonance, where like is the state of dissonance coming from like your, let's say like your representation of how others perceive you, right? Like that's a very different type of like negative attractor than your need for control, right? Where again like the extremes of those distributions would be personality disorders, but we all have, you know, that to one extent or another. There are also, I mean, maybe the things that are a little bit more tricky is where there's nothing that is like strongly wrong or particularly wrong, but there's enough things that are like somewhat wrong that they add up together synergistically. And those are kind of quite difficult to diagnose. And I would actually say, yeah, like for example, benzo withdrawal, like mild benzo withdrawal is kind of like that. The person just feels weird and unpleasant. And my sense is that that's just because like a lot of their systems are like slightly off. But there's not one thing you can point to and say like, oh, it's the immune system, or like, oh, it's the heartbeat irregularities. Like, no, they're all a little bit off. But the compounding effect of all of those like badly tuned systems is like actually a very substantial dissonance. Fibromyalgia also might be related to that. Essentially things that are like very difficult to diagnose and treat. Like I think might fall into a category of synergistic bad effects of just lots of things being slightly wrong. In which case, yeah, kind of like very broad annealing targets might be the only solution in that case, right? Like you're not gonna fix it just one at a time, unless it's pragmatically plausible. But in that case, yeah, things like deep equanimity and let the system reorganize itself over the course of several months might be the only way. Mm-hmm. It's also quite related to some research I did several years ago about, this is like 2017, 2018, where I was like looking at how to fix dissonance in sound. This is like there's a very general kind of like hierarchy of problems in sound. Like from the most diagnosable and treatable, which is, for example, the combination of pure tones that cause beat patterns. Easy, because then all you have to do is like add like an inverse wave of like one of those tones to cancel it, and then you only have like a consonant, pure tone. Fine, like fantastic. You can deal with that very easily. It's kind of like, find the inverse vibration for that. But then you have like things that are more tricky. Like for example, you could have that the beat patterns are chaotic or random, or the spacing between them is unpredictable. In which case there's no single vibration you can put in that will cancel it, because it keeps changing. So there's kind of like this hierarchy of like, well, at the most diagnosable and treatable is when you can just add an inverse wave, all the way to the completely undiagnosable and untreatable, in which case the only thing you can do is either just add a bunch of white noise, because that's just gonna blunt across the board, or do like some really heavy re-annealing. Maybe 5-MeO DMT, like at that point, is the one thing that might just like take you out of this completely untractable problem. But with various things in between. I mean, there's like things like, well, maybe the noise is chaotic, but it's always in this region of the spectrum. In which case, you don't need white noise. You just need noise in that region of the spectrum, right? So there's many kind of like how specific the treatment has to do also has to do with how generalized the problem is and how unpredictable and chaotic it is. I know this is very broad and abstract, but it's sort of like what I would think is like, yes, once you identify the problem and the kind of like key questions is how reliable and predictable and targetable is the problem, and the more it is that way, then the more a solution like, well, just add the inverse wave will start to function.
How do you imagine that would be done?
Yeah, I mean the extreme example is like literally if you have like a source of pain that is like very constant and predictable, you can in principle just like add an inverse wave, and they actually have done this, like that is like one type of pain treatment for like sciaticas, I believe, where they literally are kind of like canceling out that particular signal. Like that's like the best, like that's a wonderful, like, okay, super simple, you just fix the problem. Whereas yeah, like, you know, depression, generalized anxiety, benzo withdrawal, we're talking about like, yeah, everything is a little bit wrong.
Would you say on the computational level that, for example, if there is a representation that either generates feeling of hurt or feeling of anger,
yeah,
if you send Metta to it, is that the case of either noise or inverse?
Yeah, that's a case of well, you're adding a consonant vibration to it,
yeah,
in a medium that can learn and adapt. I mean, it would be different than like, you know, like a very harsh sound that comes from the environment, in which case like sending Metta to it will have limited effects because you're not going to be able to change the thing outside. Whereas if the source of dissonance is internal, adding Metta to it, eventually you're going to be doing like field annealing on it, right? Like the whole principle that when you treat a system, a nervous system, as a field, it starts to learn the field dynamics. So that's the thing, like what internally sending Metta to something is doing.
Would you say becoming an ocean is a case where you become a field?
Yeah, absolutely. That would be like a clean example. Where, yeah.
Nice. So we have the typology of negative attractors, and yeah, if there's nothing more here, we can move on
we're
to
gonna
chapter 10.
Power through this, yes.
Harnessing the negentropy of peak states.
Yes. So, yeah, I mean, if you're doing, for example, like something like daily yoga, again, with a lot of cautions to be applied, but it's something like, okay, yeah, like you have the internal representation of Krishna or Avalokiteshvara, whatever it is, Jesus. It's a very consonant and clean representation. Literally, you know, when I say like harness that negentropy, literally you can do techniques like, oh, imagine that you're placing it in different parts of your body. So it's like, well, now Krishna is like healing your shoulder, now your heart, now your stomach, now. So that's where like you're doing more with the negentropy. And also because, yeah, it's kind of this inverse entropy, like this very simple, well-organized region of the field, it will absorb the stress and dissonances wherever you place it. Which again, yeah, like I think is one reason why people become strong believers in religions, right? They're like, well, actually, Jesus healed me.
Yeah.
Or Psychotherapy does a lot, Avalokiteshvara, that melts everything into golden light in the body, which is there's like you're creating this new medium through which the waves of Avalokiteshvara can travel. So broadly speaking, I mean, I guess like the high level would be something like increasing the surface area of the negentropy towards your system and target it towards the most hurt parts. I like how Psychotherapy does the hurt parts very non-dually, where you first become, you could say, the ocean of awareness, the whole field of consciousness, and then in that field, since it's so vast and infinite and warm and loving and comfy, etc., you can invite the hurt parts in this smoothing environment, very therapeutic environments, and let it dissolve into the pleasant ocean, in the warmness, in the care, in the love of the field of consciousness being the field of love and warmness and love. It's very, very nice. Very high valence.
Exactly. I mean, which we can contrast it with like not taking advantage of it. I mean, I think it's more the Shenzhen Young talks about like 3 different types of religious approaches. The first one is like religion as morality, or like a systems of like codes of morality, right?
Yeah.
The second one is like religion as for like loving kindness, and then the third one is religion as a source of mysticism and like oneness and dissolution and enlightenment. I mean, like he would say like, well, even Christian mystics are like, the average Christian might use it more as a source of moral codes. The nuns and some of the ecclesiastic people might use it as metta. But then like the hidden mystics and esoteric traditions, they're using it for enlightenment. They're like, if you're using like these representations only for moral code, like you're just missing out on being able to propagate it and pass them through your system, and missing out on a big opportunity there.
Also, maybe one thing that comes to mind is that for some people where metta just doesn't seem to work, but they can like go through all the jhanas, first get into the space without like any love, like nothingness, even like maybe cessation, like neither perception or non-perception, or I would generalize it to neither qualia nor non-qualia.
Yeah, that's better.
Or neither superposition of all ontologies nor not. Nor not.
Nice.
Maybe that's even more general. Interesting. Yeah, that when you deconstruct yourself like this, and when you start I think I was doing this in the beginning. When you start reconstructing yourself, and in that reconstruction, since you're much less tangled into your usual priors, that start like when your reality starts booting up again after the complete void, basically, then there it's much easier to add love priors in the more fundamental layers. So when you can stack it to the various levels, and before you get back into the shared hallucination that the consensual reality.
Yeah. I mean, this would be explained in terms also of like symmetry here, because deconstruction is like returning to symmetry.
Yeah.
And then symmetry gives you these like clean wave propagation dynamics.
Yeah.
So then it's like, well, then it will be able to propagate more in the system. So doing it in a deconstructed state is going to enhance the efficiency of this process for sure. As long as you don't also deconstruct the source of metta at the end, right? I mean, unless, well...
Yeah, it depends, depends. Yeah, I feel like the source of metta can be arbitrary representation that's as arbitrarily localized or delocalized. If you
but it has to be of a specific shape though. Like I do think like if your idea of metta is like screaming at things in like dissonant way, I mean maybe if you're like really advanced and you can like reinterpret that and put it in the field and it's dissipating, but in general like metta will require like shapes that have like consonances. And if you're not doing that, it can still be high valence, right? But like I do think like metta intrinsically has that kind of these like wave emitting.
I think that warmness is a big part of it, and connection is a big part of it.
Yeah.
And attraction is weird there because that can also turn into grasping.
Yeah. Like disinterested love at the end.
What Michael Test also loves to do to induce metta is that you basically take your self model, either physically or more abstractly, or like you melt into golden light, for example, and then that golden light is like basically you return into, some DMT trips are about this, I noticed. You return into like the motherly like care, where you're like in the Avalokiteshvaras, that's like the whole universe of love, like in it, how do you say this in English? In there,
you're rocking.
like when you have a baby,
Soothing.
yeah. And basically it's like the whole universe caring this way, like in very, very motherly feel, and that seems to be extremely healing for lots of people. And Michael Taft loves to do this a lot. My favorite meditation from him is the Mother Buddha Love one.
Yeah.
For viewers.
Yeah.
That's like, I've been doing that so many times, 3 times on 5-meo DMT.
Oh wow.
And it's lovely.
Which, by the way, is legal in Czechia.
Yes. That's legal.
Just as a...
Really?
Yeah.
Or unscheduled, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, go Czechia. Nice. Yeah, I think this is somewhat clear, like spectral considerations, frequency transform.
Oh yeah, that's quite related to like energy shifting. Because just as you could shift between sensory modalities, as I was telling earlier, you can also shift between frequencies. And I think it also has to do with, it's similar to the planet getting a boost, except that you're doing it from one frequency to another, like taking drums in order to energize the piano, the trumpets. Well, there's more to these. When essentially, when you have an internal representation, and it's, in general, it's kind of like black body radiation. Like in general, the more energized the representation is, the more the energy will shift towards the higher frequencies. But this is just a general pattern, and like it's not always the case. And you can also just energize like the lower frequencies and do things to prevent the lower frequencies to go to the higher ones. But something that is very common, for example, is like whether it's like 5-meo DMT or like a deep meditation, that during the peak, actually, you will be instantiating a lot of like very high frequency vibrations. And as you're coming down and you're annealing, many of the gestalts were actually, you can noticeably notice how like they're actually becoming slower and slower and slower and slower. And that seems like an very important aspect of it. That like as the energy shifts, like the frequency also goes down. To a first approximation with lots of counterexamples and lots of subtlety there, but there's a principal component of more energy, higher frequencies. And it is something that like, well, ideally actually, like what you want is internal representations and dynamics that are consonant across the entire spectrum. And I think this is something that doesn't happen by default, and people have like preferred energy levels. Like some people like are only consonant in high frequencies, so like they will need to like constant stimulation to feel good. And some people are only consonant in low frequencies. But ideally you're consonant across the board. So like, some like advanced psychonaut, for example, ideally they will feel wonderful like during the onset of 5-meo DMT, at the peak and in the offset, and like at every point everything is consonant. Now that will require a lot of like fine-tuning and many years of practice. The other kind of like broad consideration or something to think about, I believe this is discussed in Neural Annealing, actually, the article of 2019 by Mike and in collaboration with me. That like, for example, when you have like somebody who's like switching between two affective key signatures constantly, you know, like going from like happy state, depressed state, and so on, or like bipolar, for example. The thing that anneals is actually representations that can survive in both environments. Like essentially when you are flooding the system with like a number of states and you keep shifting between them, the thing that will survive is those that can endure and exist in all of them. And if you're only in a positive one, like yeah, your patterns probably are not fit for like low valence and vice versa. But I think the same with frequencies. Therefore, like if you want to have kind of these like full spectrum consonants on a regular basis, you also kind of experience the higher energies, so that your representations are also survivable in those contexts.
Yeah, I haven't thought about it in that way before. So like, what kind of representation would not survive? Just like for an example, in a case of a bipolar.
Yeah. Well, for example, like thinking something like God is good forever or something, or like there's only goodness. Like when you're depressed, like that just breaks down. Even though it feels very real when you're manic, but then you cycle enough between those two extremes, and then like you stop actually having those representations. I mean, you may anneal instead something much more like neutral. I mean, maybe something like, oh, reality is neutral actually, and like it just depends on how you look at it.
Okay, so that would be the goal.
Potentially, yeah. Well, I'm not sure actually. I mean, I wouldn't say that the bipolar dynamic is necessarily good, right? Because I mean, this is more just an observation of what survives in those contexts is what can be like thrive in both environments. But that's like along the valence axis. Really, the other one that I think we care more about in this case is energy. And you want the representations to survive along the energy range, but ideally be always positive in valence. And like that I think is the ideal, that you can go from like deeply relaxed to like super excited and back and forth with no problem.
I'll think about that.
Yeah, maybe think of in the valence arousal chart. Like we can think of like what would survive if you're constantly transitioning, let's say top left quadrant to top right quadrant. Like you go from like intense anxiety to intense excitement. That's a type of personality and something's surviving there.
Yeah.
And for each of these like quadrant transitions or even the diagonals, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, sometimes if you are a personality that tends to be more concentrated in a certain quadrant, you cannot even integrate some other representations that belong to others. It's simply not a part of the world model.
Yeah.
Maybe what comes to mind is like stuff like open individualism seems to be work. If you work in each.
Exactly. Yeah, or high-end equanimity as well.
Yeah.
Like that is one interpretation too, that like in Shenzhen Yang style or like Zen, that they do really hardcore, intense, like negative valence things to cultivate equanimity. It is like, oh, can your equanimity survive in any environment?
Yeah, Metta also did that. Isn't he a student of Shenzhen Yang? I think so, actually.
I think they're related. I'm not okay. Maybe student teacher relationship.
Yeah, might not be true.
I don't think so. But Michael Taff, he's open about this. That like he has taken LSD like 700 times.
Yeah.
At very high doses as well, and like.
Yeah.
And integrated that with meditation practice. And so probably. Well, that is climbing the energy level, the energy rate.
And meditated without sleeping for like I think 50 hours or so, or how much is it on some mountain. He told in one after meditation discussion.
Oh wow! Wow.
I'm not sure if 50 hours, but he talked about how extremely sleep deprived he was, and he noticed how like everything was like disintegrating because of that even more, and that helped him basically reach also equanimity, and also like that also gave him like that I'm still here, like this kind of feeling that whatever happens, infinite consciousness, the vast space of awareness, still here.
So are you saying that sleep deprivation boosted the process of
That seems to
Education.
disintegrate, destabilize lots of priors, since brain that is more sleepy has less stuff enabled. So that's then you can like notice how your experience looks like from when less of your software system is enabled basically. And if you go to the extreme, you like collapse almost like lots of the stuff, and just are in the evolutionary smallest part. That what stays active is like just the evolutionary oldest parts basically.
Yeah.
And there you can see that. Okay, I'm still here. Consciousness is still here, even though all the what makes me disintegrated. Something like this.
I think I was avoiding to write anywhere that like sleep deprived states are good.
They can be literally damaging, so yeah.
Right.
But the literal damage can create this that is mentioned, like yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty hardcore. I mean, like, I don't know, like, Zen branches of Buddhism in Japan, some of them are so hardcore that like, I would never endorse them, I think, but you know, right, like there's like these thing where like you run a kind of like a double marathon or like a marathon and a half every day for 1,000 days, and it's not even like just a flat surface, it's actually like kind of like mountainous, and like and you run with these like very like poor shoes that are like just like ancient, like not good weather.
Like Greek sandals.
Yeah, I think they're like sandals made of some like plant material that like it's just not optimal for you, and they sleep like 3-4 hours a day during that whole period. They do take a couple breaks, but then one of those breaks actually involves going into a cave without food and without water for 9 days and no sleep, and it's essentially
all 9 days.
Yeah, and you're supposed to be chanting constantly all throughout, and like you barely survive. Like this is like really at the edge. Like people who have done that say like, yeah, I was feeling all my organs are like were shutting down at that point.
Probably also literally.
yeah. But Shenzhen Young uses this as like an example of like the power of like very advanced equanimity. That like these monks can do something that like not even like the most professional athletes can do. Like there was actually a very professional athlete, marathon runner, who tried to do this and like quit after like 7 days. Like I can't do this. I don't know. I wouldn't endorse this. I think this is not a good use of time.
7 days is also a big milestone, I would say.
Really, what?
7 days is also a big milestone out of the 9 days.
Oh, I see.
But yeah, probably not good for long-term health.
No. I don't think this is like smart. I think this is like fascinating, right? But to me, it seems unnecessary.
Right.
It also kind of reminds me of that meme where one guy tries to meditate and it's like, okay, let's not think about let's not think basically, and then he starts visualizing how he's constantly meditating, and people are like, oh wow, he's so good. And here's your medal for the best meditator, and then he's fuck no.
Exactly.
You can get stuck in this like, I'm gonna be the best meditator possible, mindset, in this competitive.
It is, when Titan realm energies are motivating it. I actually, I mean, this is personal anecdote, but like I did notice that on my first Jana retreat, it was very healing. Then I noticed like I do have like some Titan energy, not super strong, but like, I mean, especially looking earlier in my life, like when I was like competing in math Olympiads and you're really trying to do really well at school and like getting lots of prizes and lots of competitions, and just it was partly motivated. I mean, it was mostly motivated by like I want to find like the most interesting people and talk to them and everything. But there was an edge of like I want to be the best. Like I really want to just like be extraordinary, world class, and like it's a powerful energy, and I think it's not bad. Like it is inherently neutral. It just depends on how you use it. The problem is when it's controlling you without you knowing it. At least in my Jana retreat, my first Jana retreat, a big takeaway was like the first kind of like half of it was like me feeling kind of disgusted as like really like I had that much energy like that when I was a teenager. But then actually coming to terms with it and because Robert Bria will tell you something like like the point as he sees it is not to just completely eliminate suffering with meditation. I mean, what you can do with like a Theravada path and like all of that, but then like what we need, especially in the modern world, is something much broader, and like what the human soul needs. Actually, there's like things to do and people to meet and places to go and like ambition and like achievement. Like it's part of it, and like you need that to feed your soul. So I came to terms with it, and I was like, no, actually, I'm very glad I had that energy when I was a teenager. Like even though like it causes some troubles, but like it's fine.
It can be motivating to actually progress.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it is true. A lot of meditators in a lot of like spiritual schools, sometimes like they're just in Titan energy and they have no idea, right? Like they make no progress because they're constantly thinking like, I am the best meditator.
And then when they and then they go to online communities and talk about how they are the most enlightened and nobody is on their level.
Yes.
And like
and they get hurt and then vindictive. He's like, you didn't acknowledge that I'm the only liberated person? What the fuck? Fuck you.
That's a great liberation representation. I like, if you imagine competition in equanimity, it reminded me of like some like Christian like flagellation. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yes. Or a flagellation? I don't know.
But like who can stand more suffering and more self-harm?
Yeah.
I think it's really important to
Very.
like try to kind of like convey these things in ways that will not make someone think that this is a way to practice equanimity,
No, I mean,
like to self-mutilate.
we can anticipate that this happens and will happen, and essentially there's kind of a percentage of the population that is what they're doing and what they want, and like if I mean essentially like in, for example, psychedelic communities, right? Some percentage of the people have like this edge of like oh well, I took LSD, like 1,000 micrograms of LSD and changed a tire, or like I did mountain climbing on 700 micrograms of LSD, and it's like that is clearly this narcissistic kind of even the term heroic dose is something that James Fadiman says like we should try to remove from the vocabulary, because it just triggers this like Titan realm energy, right? And equanimity practices definitely will have that effect on a percentage of the population. We can just predict that it will happen and anticipate it. I don't think, like, this is very important for us, I don't think we have the burden to make it so that like it doesn't trigger anybody that way, because that is just how they are composed. And like because like at some point you you cannot, I think, like write something that will be interpreted in the right way by everybody. I mean, essentially, that will just lead to paralysis. It's more like, well, we can make people aware that this is a dynamic, and hopefully filter out the people who are like that, at least in communities, or be able to work around them. But I think realistically, that is what happens, and like because it's very ubiquitous. Like you go to a rock concert, you know, the mosh pit, like there is this signaling, and it has also to do with like fitness signaling, right? It's one way in which you signal your fitness is how much abuse you can take. So like specifically, there's like rock concerts, there's like things that are like on purpose as harmful as possible, just so that you can tell people, hey, I did this and I survived and so on.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Imagine that testosterone is coupled to equanimity, and then in that case like that you have a society where those kinds of people would be just like exposing themselves to like the worst possible qualia and but like feeling as they are the best, you know.
Yes. Well, the funny thing is like the qualia that they don't expose themselves to is a qualia of like lack of validation. Like that is the equanimity they should be pursuing actually. But they don't know it. They don't know that it's like they're so attached to that. But actually that would be the good equanimity practices. Like like go into a room and have everybody not pay attention to you and just kind of like treat you as a completely normal person and like endure that. Yeah.
I might add that as a practice.
Yeah.
Super nice. Okay. We have basically two more.
Okay. Yeah.
Two more.
Let's go.
Preventing information destruction.
Yeah, I think this is also something that has to do with working memories lots to some extent. Although I mean, it's something like how being aware of like how much information you can handle, and I mean, let's say like for example, LSD, high doses LSD will, for most people, be very confusing, like because it deconstructs so many things, and it could be very high valence, you know, in some moments or like for periods of time. But at the same time, like it's like during periods where you forget who you are or like where you are and things like that. And that is like kind of a hazard, honestly. The same with I think similar to what we were discussing. Like if you do, you're at risk of underfeeding. But I think like from a very kind of robbery, like very technical approach here is like what can you do? You can sensitize yourself to the feeling of information loss. And when you notice it and you notice that the information that is getting lost is important, then you kind of like do it with more delicacy, or like you're aware of it, you're mindful of the information that is getting deconstructed, so that it doesn't disappear without you knowing what you did. But I think that is a fairly advanced thing actually, because you kind of have to sensitize yourself to like, how do different representations carry information, and in what way this low entropy, high valence state is like reorganizing them. Again, like sometimes this is very good. I mean, like one of the things that is thought about in Teapot, at the very least, you know, in Twitter's, I guess like meditation, this part of Twitter, like, you know, vibey rationalists sort of thing. It's
post-rationalists.
Post-rationalists, like this information loss. Like you know, you want to be able to create internal boundaries when they're necessary, essentially, to prevent the propagation of like the positive valence low entropy state to regions that are actually carrying important information. And one of the things that the Teapot people talk about is Nick Camarada, for example, is like, MDMA, that literally one of the things that can cure you is like you go back to like a bad memory, and like you literally override it with like a different outcome, and then like it's like you have like a different life essentially.
That I think this seems to be basis of lots of anti-trauma psychotherapies.
Yeah.
Basically, memory reconciliation of
Yes.
some older like representation.
And chemotherapy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's one of them. Yeah.
And again, that you know that could be very good if the thread is actually just gone, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you're just underfeeding, you're gonna be underfeeding on like models of people and society. You could just do it too much.
Yeah. Like when you underfit everything to just laugh in a sense where you predict that people will be by default lovely, then you're so susceptible to manipulators, for example,
Yep.
or kindness.
Yeah. 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 But then the nice thing is that yeah, there are places and people and communities where yeah, kindness is the norm.
Yes.
So it can be adaptive in those contexts.
But it's great in order to not get extreme disinterpretation errors to be mindful. That's not how the whole world works.
That's right. That's right.
I have the impression that it's way easier to fall into that kind of trap when you're like one-on-one with someone. But like when you take that interaction to a group dynamics, where there's maybe like 10 other people, then you can see how like the someone's core or like their attitude is changing, and because they're immediately starting to change themselves in the context to new environment where they will like get some other kind of validation rather than just from you, maybe not anymore signaling loving kindness towards you because now they have different priorities and this persona will just like fall apart.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something else regarding information destruction. So this thought is related to some work that was, or like some insights by Oliver Sacks and music therapy. Are you familiar with Oliver Sacks's intervention for patients with dementia and Parkinsonism? So there are a few really nice documentaries. I think that one of the most recent ones is called Coming Alive, where like patients who would basically be spending their days sitting in a corner, being very catatonic, like not moving, not being responsive to external stimuli. When he would or like later other therapists would play them, give them headphones and play them music that they like or liked, they would, as they say, sort of like come alive. So what that means is that it seems that just being exposed to the music would essentially bring their memory back in those instances. So like not that it's a permanent kind of thing. And they would also be able to move and look as if they're not affected so much by their Parkinsonism as they were before. So I mean, I guess you've also noticed that when you listen to music, if a song begins and you haven't heard it for a certain while, like there's this initial flash in which you can remember, you instantly remember, you map out where it was that you maybe like first heard it, or another occasion in which this song was coupled to a certain experience. So I was thinking about music as a kind of like maybe even myelin, like as in you know what myelin is, of course, or not? Yeah. basically the layer around neurons that facilitates information transfer, so that like music would serve as a kind of tool that helps couple experiences with feelings and can basically contribute in the process of not having maybe a complete or total information destruction, because if you listen to more
Right.
music to like in different parts of your life, different experiences, they kind of like connect together better in that internal map. And yeah, what do you think? Like, would like regular or relatively regular like exposure to music that you actually like throughout life could contribute to cognitive functions, especially in the context of memory? I had a whole kind of like a symbolic like neuron myelin like representation in my head where I was thinking of like
It's inducing spaced repetition.
yes, but shape repetition more importantly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna do something. What is it? Sacrilegious, which is for the sake of this experiment. I mean, like, or demonstrated is like. I mean, yeah, there's probably like an optimal kind of like information complexity measure of the difference of like one day to another or like 1 week to another. Right, I guess like traveling a lot keeps you young in some sense psychologically, right? But of course not if you're traveling a lot to places where like they're all the same. Now you can travel anywhere you like as long as it's a what is it, like a Prince cruise, like or as long as it is like a Sheraton in a Hilton hotel in some beach or something. Like yeah, that's not really traveling a lot. But of course, like yeah, what comes to mind here in terms of like information preservation is like, well, like unique scents every day, or changing. So what I'm gonna do right now is actually overlap two perfumes that I've never smelled at the same time. Yeah, this is just gonna mark today, or like forever if I combine these perfumes. This is not good. They don't combine well, by the way, but but yeah, you
No,
want
it's
to
unique.
definitely
Ooh.
unique.
I actually quite like it, I think. I don't know. It's very mixed valence.
Very
It
mixed
could
valence.
I think remind me of like a public restroom where some people have
They're both.
changed their smells accidentally.
Yes. Yes.
Hmm.
They both smell great, but not together.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, you can of course couple memories with other things other than just music.
Yeah.
But I think it's very interesting how it can create this like arrow in your mind just hearing the beginning of a song that you know very well.
Mm-hmm.
Like I mean, does it sound like something that would be interesting to mention here, or would you just like leave it as a curiosity in music and annealing?
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's worth mentioning. I mean, like maybe worth mentioning. Yeah, kind of like the. I mean, it's more kind of like a broader plan, right? It's like if you have like nursing homes or. Yeah, like having seasons. Things like change over time, but then also you have like you're able to revisit, kind of like. Well, let's say you have like a remembrance day, where you explicitly remember like the different weeks of the year, and what flavor they had each week, like various kind of reconsolidation exercises. But maintaining them like different enough, because yeah, the risk is like if your days are exactly the same, they start to blend into each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, like my last year.
Was it very homogeneous?
Yeah, just like I mean, as I mentioned, that I turned 30 last summer, and now I was really surprised that it's already going to be that date again, because I was absorbed in writing this and learning, but it was incredibly rich.
Yeah.
But it was the same almost every day. But pleasant also. Somehow, like, I could imagine like suddenly being 80, you know, and,
Yeah.
and realizing, oh my gosh, I'm still in this kind of flow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this even, like, it made me think about Qualia formalism, you know, just like if there would be like cymatic objects that are coupled to a moment of experience instead of just like a slightly more precise or specific, rather than saying just a mathematical object, like giving it like a cymatic properties, that in this kind of way exposing yourself to music that is familiar would create this a familiar resonance that could couple with the past experiences that had the same one, and kind of like create this thread where memory might be where you would remember something that you couldn't otherwise.
Yeah.
It happened to me, like, oh my gosh, this song, I was traveling, I just remembered the moment where I was like sitting in a train and looking at a landscape. It's when this song played, you know, and like I wouldn't have had this experience in my memory otherwise.
Yes.
So nice.
Yeah.
I have some songs like that associated with very strongly motivated states. So when I play that song again, it induces the motivation again.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or complex thinking also.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Or nature.
Okay.
Do you wanna move on?
Yeah, the last one.
Yes. Leaving a breadcrumb, placing tethers between states.
Yeah. Yeah. So the classic example would be learning the jhanas, and then like the thing that you actually learn is. You can learn a single jhana without knowing what you're doing just because you stumbled upon it. I mean, like, that happens. Somebody might say like, oh yeah, I do meditation, I don't follow any teachers, and for some reason I just experience like super deep tranquility, super deep peace, and it's like they don't know like, oh, you're getting to the third jhana. But if you're following like, a very systematic approach, like in Theravada teachings, or like Robert Beata, who like really emphasizes like, no, like make very precise distinctions so that you're not just in a soup, you're just actually, this is the first jhana, very clearly, you know, very pure. Then of course you can mix things at your own discretion, your own will, depending on, you can make a hybrid of first and third jhana or whatever it may be. But the point is like, if you do want to map it out, if you do want to have access to these states, then not only you need to learn the state, you also need to learn the transitions. And sometimes like learning specific transitions might be really helpful at first, so that you can visit the entire space. I mean, personally, I'm not that advanced. I can't access all the jhanas. I can access the first and second and a little bit of the third sometimes. But what Robert Beata says is that like each jhana has its own kind of version of access consciousness or access concentration, where you notice like, oh, I'm in the first jhana, okay, now there's the possibility of going to the second jhana, and then you tune into that. That transition is like a learnable transition. Eventually Robert Beata suggests to actually develop like mastery, like being able to go to all the jhanas and make all the transitions. You can go from the seventh to the third instantly. You know all the paths, but you've got to start somewhere, and most likely it's going to be like kind of like one long single path, where it's like, you know, from second to third, etc. Good, maybe out of order. Like for some people, like the order might be first, third, second, fourth, fifth, depending on their previous meditation experience, their genetics, whatnot. So you want ideally to be able to recognize and practice the transitions, and I think that's often quite neglected. That is one thing. The second thing, it has to do with information transfer and reconstruction. Although this is more general psychonautics as opposed to just annealing. This is the case of like, how do you bring information back from the DMT world, for example? And the sort of like techniques that arise is, well, each level, you know, has its own kind of like mathematical signature, like whether it is, you know, the two-dimensional hyperbolics or the 3D, you know, crystals and so on. So there, actually, the breadcrumb is, oh, how do I take a representation that is in the 3D crystal world and somehow collapse it or embed it into the hyperbolic 2D world, which is like a lower level, one lower level. So
compactification.
Exactly. So you learn things like compactification, which is when you take a dimension and you roll it up or like you collapse it, but you remember that you did this. That is the key. Like I think a lot that happens. I mean, this happens. They call it like folding in the DMT Nexus hyperspace lexicon. They have like this vocabulary for the DMT space. Folding is like the feeling of coming down when you're noticing how the dimensions are collapsing until you get back to 3 dimensions. That process is something where you can leave breadcrumbs. It's like, oh, I'm about to collapse to a lower dimension or a representation that is less complex. How can I maintain information about where I was? Because if you don't do this mindfully, you lose information and like you forget and sure. you stop having access. I think that is probably a defining characteristic of good psychonauts. Is like, as they're coming down, they're able to encode information from the high state into the somewhat lower state. And then if you do it enough times with enough practice, yeah, there's a tether. It's like, oh, I ended up in this crystal, but I know that it represents a, 4D hyperbolic structure.
Okay. So besides just a psychedelic state, do you have any ideas for placing some kind of tethers in the states where people might be dealing with challenging emotional experiences?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, a lot of people use things like, let's say like a ring or like some kind of like amulet to remind themselves of better spaces. And then that can be kind of like a vector for that other space to start propagating and entering. And I think, I mean, like if you are mindful of, as you improve in valence, you get better what the transitions feel like. Then when you're wrapped up in a negative state, I mean, you're not going to instantly go to a much better state, but at least you know the gradient. They're like, okay, in this direction it's going to get better. And to a first approximation, it tends to involve like increasing coherence. So like learning the flavor of what increased coherence feels like that movement, that direction. There might be more specific things though in terms of leaving breadcrumbs. I think I mean, revisiting the concept of associations, like if you can use a single perfume for like when you feel really good. I don't know, this is like a mixed thing. For example, David Pierce like uses a lot of like music often for like mood boosting. Again, like, he doesn't meditate, he's not his path in any way, but he has a little bit of the dilemma, because if he's not feeling very good, the question is like, okay, do I listen to a song that I really like? Because yes, it might boost my mood, but then also it might dirty my associations with that song.
I sometimes use music like this as well. I have one song which is extremely antidepressive for some reason. Yeah,
it's a good question. Like, I mean, I guess it's a matter of experimentation. It's like, is this actually always boosting me back? And okay, because if you can actually associate it with a feeling of getting better, as opposed to associating it with a state you were in, then maybe that's a very good use. And then every time you listen to the song, it's gonna reinforce the movement towards feeling better.
Yeah,
that could be.
All right. I think we made it through.
Yes.
How long is it? Like 2 hours?
No, it's longer. It's almost 3. 3 hours and 20 minutes.
Oh, wonderful.
It's
So much
lovely.
content.
Yes, it's like in that meme of like 3 kids in a. Have you seen that? Like the meme of like 3 kids in a couch, and like they're like 9 years old, and the title of the YouTube video is like a 3-hour long video. It's like it's like, talking about AI and consciousness.
Yeah, true,
Yeah, I know.
We just did that.
Yes. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in.
May your neither qualia nor non-qualia state reconstruct into infinite meta.
That exactly. Infinite bliss, everybody.
Yeah.